Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Good. We'll just say for the recording, it's Dr. Dennis Williamson. Yes.
That's fine. Yes, thanks.
Great. And I'm going to put on the screen document 42, which is version 2 of your report. Can you see that on the screen?
Yes, I can.
All right. And this is the version that was circulated on 25th of October. We did file a first version on 30 September. And I just wanted to ask you to confirm. My understanding is that the only things that changed between the two versions were that you added an executive summary, which starts here on Roman 3. And also that where in this document we see something highlighted, I'll try to find an example. Sorry, it's going to give you all whiplash to do that, but here's an example. This word Willatook, that's a typo or other error that you've corrected. So is that right, that they're the two sorts of changes between the first version and the second version?
Yes, that is correct. There is one other correction that I didn't pick up at that time, which I can mention to you, but I don't know whether this is the right time to do that or not. But
No, perfect. Just tell me the page number and I'll put it on the screen.
Okay. According to my reference, it's page number 96, and it's in reference to figure number 30.
Okay, let me just find page 96. I don't have a page 96, it ends at 89 for me.
Are you reading PDF pages or page?
Oh, yes. No, you mean,
sorry.
Do you mean printed? You mean
printed
PDF
page number? Yes, I'm sorry. I don't have a PDF page.
No, sorry, just I'm going off printed pages. And my version of your report ends at page 89. Sure, it's 96. Alternatively,
it's on page 96.
If you give me the text, I can do a Control F search.
Right. Okay, just a second. It should be just, if you put in figure 30, it should come up.
Here it is on the printed page is page 70.
Yeah, that is correct. I've got it wrong here.
Okay, and what would you like to correct on this page?
Okay, it's just the in the heading, it says ratings for 117 to 199 meter high turbines. And I must have picked that up from another reference. I believe that Sullivan's paper actually assesses turbines that are in the range of 91 meters to 123 meters. Okay,
so we'll take that as a correction to those figures. You'll replace that with 91 to 123, will you?
Yes, please.
Okay. Any other corrections to make?
Well, nothing that I can think of at the moment that is very major. There may be some grammatical or spelling errors here or there, but I think that we've picked up most of them.
That's all right. You'll be forgiven for those, I'm sure. And I have to ask you, are the opinions that you express in this report truly your own opinions?
Yes, they are.
And I think the panel was interested to know whether between producing the first and the second version, you had read any other material in this proceeding.
So, Mr. Feller, just to clarify, from the specified deadline for expert witness statements in the direction to this final document.
Right.
Yeah.
I might have to supply Dr. Williamson with those dates. I think from memory, the deadline was something like 25 September. Let me see if I can find the directions.
I think that's correct.
Yes. So, Dr. Williamson, there was a deadline to file on 25 September. So your first report was 5 days late. And then this second report was another month after that. And so the panel's just interested to know Well, let's start with Mr. Burgess' material, because he's replying to that. Now, you clearly had seen Landform's report by the time that you produced the second report, correct?
Now, sorry, can I just correct something there? My deadline that was given to me was not 25th of September, it was 29th of September. So I was only a couple of days late, if that.
Yeah.
To answer your question, I did not have time or did not seek to look at any other expert witness statements that had been submitted at all. In fact, it would have been quite some time, a week or more after I submitted, that I might have accessed any of that. In fact, Mr. Burgess' expert witness statement, which I think was submitted on the 29th of September, I didn't actually open that up until yesterday.
Which document didn't you see until yesterday?
I think it was dated the 29th of September.
That's Mr. Burgess' slideshow, is it?
No, not slideshow. Was it September or October? Just a second, I'll just.
Well, let me make it a bit easier for you. I'll just put on the screen the relevant reports, and we'll just try to work out what you did and didn't see. So the first document I'll put on now is his initial report that was appended to the EES. Now,
I've certainly seen that. That was the EES document.
Yes, right.
I reviewed that in my expert witness statement.
Correct. Then also in the EES was a peer review by Peter Hark Consulting. Did you have the opportunity to review that before you did your first or second report?
No, I didn't. I have since that time, but not before.
Okay. And then Mr. Burge filed a further statement dated, sorry, this is his expert witness statement, 29 September 2022.
Yeah, that's
show you what that looks like.
Yes, no, that's the one I didn't open up until yesterday.
Oh, okay.
I haven't had a chance to read through it all.
Thank you. And he also, when he gave his oral evidence, had a slideshow, which I've got on the screen now. Have you seen that before?
No, I haven't. I didn't get notified of his evidence being given, and it took me a while to log in, so I didn't see that part.
Okay. And so did you get to observe any of his oral evidence?
Part of it, yes. I think I wasn't too far into to that evidence, but I missed the first part of it. Okay,
all right. Well, going back then to your own report, having read some material more recently and hearing some of Mr. Burge's evidence, did you wish to change your opinion in any way?
No, I don't think it affects my opinion from that standpoint. I don't know if there's anything in particular that Mr. Burge has added that, as I said, I haven't read through all of his expert witness statement at this point. So, but I believe that I would stay with what I've said. Okay. At this point, if there's something in particular that comes up, well, I'll make any indication of that at the time, but I can't think of anything at the moment.
All right. And before I hand you over to Mr. Power for questions, could you just explain to the panel your background in assessing wind farms and why it is that you have expertise to give evidence about the landscape and visual impacts of wind farms? Right,
okay. Well, firstly, I have worked in the area of landscape assessment and visual resource management and visual impact assessment since the early 1970s. And I've worked on wind farms here in Australia for a number of clients, including wind farm companies, state government agencies, as well as community groups that may be opposed to wind farms. I've done that since the late 1990s, I think roughly about 1996, 1998, something in that realm. And I've probably worked on around, I don't know, 15 to 20 different wind farm projects in one capacity or another over the years in New South Wales, Victoria, and Tasmania.
Okay, thank you for that. In referring to Mr. Power, I forgot, of course, you've got a presentation that you'd like to give, don't you?
I did put together something. I was requested to do that,
Yes.
so I put together something for you.
All right, well, I'll hand over to you then. Just two things. The first is that the panel requests that people stick to 20 minutes. So if you can try to do that, that would help.
I'll do my best.
The second thing is your camera maybe is on your laptop because you're bouncing around a little bit.
Oh, probably.
We can see you. You're exactly where you need to be on the screen, but maybe it's when you wobble the table or whatever it is, there's just a bit of bouncing. I wanted to let you know.
Try to keep my arms off the table.
Over to you then.
Thank you. I'll just see if I can share my screen to put this PowerPoint on. Can you see that PowerPoint?
Yes, but it would look better if you could maximize the PowerPoint.
Right. Yes. Okay.
That's better.
Okay. So everyone can see that?
We can now, thanks.
Okay. Now I understand that it takes a second for the slides to change, so we'll just be patient with that, but I'll just go through this. So the request that I had was to do a peer review assessment of the environmental effects statement LVIA report. And in doing that, I looked at the EES scoping requirements, as well as 16 other factors that included things like landscape character and scenic quality issues, viewer and viewpoint sensitivity issues, visibility and distance zone and visual magnitude issues, also the overall landscape or visual significance issues, performance standard issues, and visual effects and impact assessment issues, including cumulative impacts there. And one that I forgot to put on this list was also looking at the representativeness of the viewpoints selected for assessment. So to begin with, and just bear with me for a second here. So to begin with, I think as an overview, there's generally, in terms of the procedure and methodology used in the LVIA, there's a lack of clear and systematic assessment. The procedural steps are not clearly conveyed. There's some conclusion and overlap, some confusion and overlapping of terms and concepts. And the assessment logic and rules of combination are not clearly explained. They are not always traceable. So in essence, what this results in is more or less a black box approach, and it's not a logical approach that many, fairly well-known planners would be advocating. And generally, this weakens the credibility of the assessment and its conclusions, in my view. And having had a read of Peter Hack's peer review as well, he seems to agree with me on quite a few of these aspects if you read through his peer review report. In addition, the type of assessment and the criteria that are used, the summary information presented is quite different for the public viewpoints that were assessed in the report from the residential viewpoints that were later assessed in the report in chapter 12 or section 12 of that report. So what I'm talking about here is that in terms of this, the LVIA, it doesn't have a clear procedure. It doesn't have a clear, flow charts indicating how the various aspects of the assessment are connected, what goes with what, and it doesn't include any specific or many specific matrices to indicate how the different factors that are assessed, how they are combined or considered in relation to each other to result in some of the outcomes that get there. So these are just two examples that I've got. One from the U.S. Forest Service, and another one is similar to the procedures that we developed for both New South Wales in their wind farm guidelines, as well as in Tasmania in relation to the scenic protection codes for the Tasmanian planning scheme. There's missing baseline assessments. Landscape character types are not really assessed in the manner that we would expect. And the landscape character units that are used to describe the sensitivity to landscape and viewers is not used as a frame of reference to assess scenic quality. Key viewpoints and travel routes are not classified by viewer sensitivity levels, and the visibility distance zones are limited, and they're not assessed from viewpoints looking towards the wind turbines, only in terms of the theoretical visibility zones from the turbines looking outward. And at least on those first 2 points, I believe that Peter Hack also found those to be problematic. If we look at the issue of not assessing scenic quality, this is a pretty important issue because the existing scenic quality of the area is quite important for establishing a baseline of what is there, and to provide a comparison or benchmark against which you would compare what the potential effect of the proposed wind farm might be on the area. And so generally, we would assess scenic quality based on landscape character types, which has not been done in this report. And this is just an example of doing the visibility distance zone assessment from the viewpoints looking back towards the wind farm or from the area surrounding those viewpoints instead of the other way around. Both are useful, but generally it's good to have both of those types of analyses in that type of an assessment, and that didn't occur in this case. There was also a lack of reference to any scenic perception surveys, which can be useful even when they're done in a simplified fashion, as we did here with about 10 scenes that we used for the Tara Springs wind farm in New South Wales. And again, Peter Hack seems to be saying that such perception studies can be quite useful. There's no assessment of the overall visual significance of the landscape that you might have when you look at what the combination of factors might be in terms of character, scenic quality, viewpoints, and viewing distances, and what those distance ranges might be. So we don't, again, have a baseline of what the overall visual significance or landscape significance of that area is, to provide a measuring stick by which the proposed alterations can be assessed. there also was a lack of recognizing some of the national and state significance factors into the assessment. The national landscape of the Great Ocean Road, for instance, was not referenced in that report. The significant landscape of considered to be of state significance by planisphere for the western cones and lava flows was also not assessed. And I believe also that there was a lack of reference to some of the Aboriginal significant landscapes that were assessed by the, I'm not sure if they were archaeologists, I think it was ecology and heritage partners assessed that. So there wasn't any reference to those particular landscapes that were found in that report. And look, the other issue that I had, but I think that's been corrected, is that the Buj Bim cultural landscape is actually a World Heritage Area, which is of international significance, and that needed to be recognized. So the other factor is that there were no visual performance standards that were developed as part of the LVIA assessment. Again, that provides benchmarks in which you may be looking at particular types of factors within your performance standards. It's quite a common thing to be done in planning circles to have performance standards. And this, again, was not part of the LVIA assessment. The landscape sensitivity concept was quite muddled through this assessment that was done for the EES. There were the LVIA defined sensitivity on one hand in terms of it being related to landscape rarity and scenic quality, but neither of those factors were assessed in the assessment. It also described visual absorption capability as one of the definitions of landscape sensitivity. Again, that was not assessed in the LVIA. It referred to sensitivity levels or sensitivity of viewer locations being associated with the typology of landscape character units. Again, those were not mapped. They were described in the report, but they were not mapped. And there was also an inconsistency in terms of the application of sensitivity. And one example is that the residential properties was said in the report to always be assessed as high sensitivity, but in some cases that wasn't the case. They were actually assessed as medium sensitivity. And Hack also made reference to this in his report, where he also pointed out that the viewer types at viewpoints H11, H12, H13 were assessed as local sensitivity, but they came under the category of major roads or connector roads, and he felt it was unclear as to how the road user differed from the local viewer types in that particular example. So I think both Hack and I believe that we should be looking at some sort of classification of the viewpoints and the travel routes through the region as to what their level of sensitivity may be. And as an example, I included in my statement this map, which looks at a possible classification of the various roads and travel routes through that area, which includes, I think I had some pointers on here that they've dropped out, but just to quickly point out, routes like the Hamilton-Port Ferry route is a relatively commonly used route by tourists to go between Port Ferry and the Hamilton and the Grampians region. And there are also local routes such as these leading to Bim National Park, which are travel routes that take tourists to those areas. Those routes can be quite important as well. Hack also discussed that in his peer review and indicated that they should be considered as a higher level of sensitivity than just local. There was no clear methodology for selection of representative photos or representative viewpoints and photo montages. Sorry, I'm just getting to some additional notes that I've got here. It was discussed that these were representative viewpoints, but the LVIA did not really clearly spell out how they were selected and how they were representative, whether they were representative only of the diversity of the types of landscapes, or whether they were also made to pick out those viewpoints in which some of the higher impact effects might have been seen. And so with some of the photo montage locations, for instance, I have questioned why those were selected, and I have indicated in my statement that there might have been some other viewpoints that would have been of greater potential impact that were not selected for that purpose. And there is a bit more explanation in the LVIA report regarding how the viewpoints for dwellings were selected, but that didn't always make complete sense to me there either. In some cases, it was said that those viewpoints were selected in relation to including trees that would demonstrate how the wind turbines could be screened. And in other cases, this is one in particular. He described that viewpoints being selected that he assumed that low-lying terrain meant that fewer dwellings needed to be assessed or considered for design and siting options that could avoid or minimize potential effects on neighboring residences. I would have thought where you've got low-lying terrain would indicate that there are going to be more locations which could potentially use to the proposed wind turbines, and that you would want to assess more viewpoints from that standpoint rather than fewer. So that's just another quick idea. Now, visual absorption capability. Here's an example of what visual absorption capability should be. It has more to do with what the components of the landscape are, the relative slope, the vegetation cover, etc. This is an example of visual absorption capability, which was, they call it sensitivity, but essentially where you've got high sensitivity, that's where you've got a low capability of absorption by the landscape, and where you've got low sensitivity, there's a high absorption. So that wasn't done in this report. I'll look also then, I had a few differences in the scale of effects for the visual magnitude. And this is where I think this is the LVIA relies on this issue of scale of effects or visual magnitude primarily as its key tool for assessing the impacts. However, the results in terms of the assessed overall visual impact did not always reflect this. And what I've got here is a comparison between the types of dominance of visual of wind turbines of the nature that we're looking at here, as assessed by Mr. Burge in the LVIA report, and how comparisons that I've made with Sullivan's research with the BLM in the USA. And this shows the distances, the distance zones that we've got here. comparison. So there's some slight differences there. But really, in terms of those differences, I think when we come down to it, except for the distances at a greater distance from the viewer, we're pretty much on the same page from that. Where I differ is mainly the way he's applied that to his assessment of the overall visual impact assessment. And I think, perhaps what is not recognized in the LVIA assessment is the degree of acuity that the human eye really has, where we can really see things at quite a distance away and at a very small portion of our field of view. Our human eye is able to distinguish these things in terms of different colors, visual contrast, and sizes. And this also applies to movement, where the human eye, as a defense mechanism, our retinal view, peripheral retinal view, picks up motion with things like spinning turbines fairly readily. This is the example that I had from Sullivan's research that we use for some of those tables. Again, we should correct the figures at the top to go from 91 to 123 instead of 117 to 199. So this was much smaller wind turbines than what we're looking at for this particular proposal. But you can still see that they are quite visible and can be detected by people at quite some distances. And I think the probably a good comparison here is if you think about, if anyone has driven down the Western Freeway, west of Melton, there's the Pentland Hills pass there that you go over before you get to Bacchus Marsh. When you're coming the other direction from Ballarat towards Melbourne, at that point, you can get quite a clear view of the city of Melbourne on a clear day. You can see the Rialto Tower and the Eureka Tower and other skyscrapers in Melbourne, which are anywhere from about 250 up to 300 meters high. You can see those very clearly on a good day as you come over that hill. Now, these wind turbines are a different type of structure, but they are of a similar height and a similar or even wider width than those types of buildings. So we can see those for quite a ways. Now, this factor that changes in wind turbine heights has increased quite a lot in recent years. And in New South Wales, the New South Wales Planning Department picked up on this quite some time ago, back in 2016, when I assisted them putting together guidelines for that. And what they were saying is that during preliminary visual impact assessments, that if you had wind turbines that were within a higher sensitivity visual influence zone, that 250 meter turbines, you should start taking a close look at what the impact of those are out as far as at least 5 kilometers. And if you're in an area of lesser significance, out as far as about just under 3.5, about 3.3 kilometers. Now, that was their assessment. That was a compromise assessment that was put together for government guidelines. My opinion is that we actually need to be looking even a bit further out than this. So we've got that. Now, also, there's an example of the LVIA's assessment of viewpoint H8 in the Hamilton Port Fairy Road. It was rated as low sensitivity and medium view numbers. It's given a overall visual impact of low, and yet I would assess that as being highly dominant. I've got some examples of that. I'll get through these slides, and if we've got time, I'll show you those other examples. I've got about 4 different examples where we can look at that type of issue. Here also, the cumulative impacts, I don't believe were adequately assessed in the environmental effects statement. And if you got up to about 7 either existing or approved or proposed wind farms in that area, there's likely to be areas where certain residents and people going down the highway are going to be looking at more than one wind farm at a time, multiple wind turbines in different directions, and different segments of their view potentially are going to be affected. Now, again, New South Wales Planning Department picked up on this issue. They put together in their guidelines an assessment of wind turbines within 8 kilometers of viewpoints. And if for the more significant landscapes, if you had wind turbines occurring in 3 or more 60-degree sectors within that view, then red flags went up. If you were in lower significance landscapes, if you saw wind turbines within 4 sectors, then the red flags went up. So that's something which wasn't done here. And I'd say that the Victorian planning guidelines just don't really address that. So very quickly then, I did a bit of an overview of the different factors that we assessed. And we can see from that although some of those factors were well addressed in the environmental effects statement, LVIA, quite a few of them were not. And so that's what I've identified in my statement. Is there time for me to look at those other examples or not?
I'm in the chair's hands on that.
We've been going on for 25 minutes, so I think the time itself is a response to your question, Dr. Williamson.
Okay, that's fine.
I'm sure it'll come out through questions.
Thank you, Dr. Williamson. Could I just ask you one question? You might have seen, well, did you see in the cross-examination of Mr. Burge questions about Budj Bim?
Yes, I do recall there were some questions about Budj Bim.
Okay, well, just that might speed up me taking to the topic of interest. You might recall.
Sorry, Mr. Dr. Williamson, can you please stop sharing your screen?
Yes, I'm just trying to get back to my controls to do that.
Sure.
Sorry.
There you go. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Filler.
Okay.
Thank you. Now, Dr. Williamson, you might recall that in the LVIA, there was a photo from the top of Budj Bim crater. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do recall that.
And did you see the cross-examination where we explored what views we were looking at from the top and whether it was east or southerly?
Yes.
Okay, so then I can put to you that the gist of the evidence was that the views from the top of the crater towards the south east in the direction of the proposed Willatook wind farm would be, Mr. Burge said in his oral evidence, partially screened. And you might remember that that was a bit different to his report, where I think that the impact was described as visible. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so have you been up to the top of Budj Bim crater in conducting your assessment?
No, I didn't get time to get up to that particular viewpoint while I was out there. I did get to the visitor outlook overlooking Surprise Lake area.
Okay.
And I drove around in some of the other access roads, and I included a view from Lake Gorrie Road further to the southeast.
Okay. In assessing the sensitivity of this landscape in the Budj Bim area, do you agree that it would be desirable to consult with local Aboriginal groups?
Yes, certainly always desirable to consult with them.
And it was suggested through re-examination of Mr. Burge that the MacArthur wind farm might be visible from the top of the crater. Do you have any view about whether adding in additional turbines at Willatook would adversely affect the area or not?
I object to that question because Dr. Williamson has just said that he's not been at the top of the crater. I don't possibly see how he can answer that question except by speculation.
Well, I'll accept that objection and leave it for submissions. Thank you. That's all, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Feder. I'll just, before I open up to questions, get an indication of time. I'll start with you, Mr. Power. How much time would you need?
I'm not very good at this, sir. I'd say in the order of an hour and a half-ish. Might be less.
Thank you. I've added the ish just in case to be.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other parties seeking to ask questions of Dr. Williamson? That's a no from Morningside Council. Okay, the questions from the IAP at the end of the other parties will be through Member O'Neill. So, Mr. Power, just noting we're scheduled for a break at 11:20. So if you can ask questions up to around that point, and then we'll take a break, and then you can continue on after that.
Absolutely, sir. And if I go past 11:20, I tend to just zoom in and forget everything else in the world when I'm questioning witnesses. So just ring the bell at 11:20 if I'm going. Thank you, sir. Dr. Williamson, good morning. So I just wanted to clarify one thing in response to Mr. Feder's. Oh, first of all, Dr. Williamson, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, okay. I assume everyone else can hear me. So I just wanted to clarify, you mentioned in response to a question from Mr. Feder that you had opened and had a look at Mr. Burge's expert witness statement yesterday. That's his witness statement, I think, of the 29th of September. Subsequent to that, Mr. Burge also prepared another witness statement of reply dated the 7th of October. Have you read that?
I skimmed through it.
Okay.
But I didn't read that before I did my statement, obviously. But
I know. You can't change the space-time continuum. We understand. I just want to make sure you've got it and you've read it. That's all.
Yeah, that's right. I'm not Doctor Who.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Now, you can't hide a wind farm with 250-meter high turbines, can you?
I'm sorry, you can't hide it?
No. People are going to see it in the vicinity.
From some place or another. That's correct.
Yeah, absolutely. So unlike the BESS or the substation, for example, you can't use on-site landscape screening to soften or reduce the appearance of the infrastructure from nearby residences or roads or other viewing locations in the vicinity, yes?
Well, no, you can use landscape screening to do that. It's a question of how long it takes for that screening, whether it's already established or whether you've got to grow it.
Okay, so are you suggesting that if we plant 250-meter high trees, we can screen the turbines?
Sorry,
it doesn't seem very logical to me. I said on-site landscape screening for 250-meter high turbines I'm putting to you is not a very practical or feasible screening solution for 250-meter high turbines, is it?
Sorry, when you say on-site, you mean planting a tree right next to the turbine?
Correct. Project site. That's what I mean by on-site.
Yeah, well, that's right. There'd be very, very few trees that would grow in that region in particular.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so a wind farm with 250-meter high turbines is always going to be visible from locations in the vicinity of the wind farm. Yes?
Well, it'll be certainly always visible from some viewpoint or another, I would imagine.
Yeah, and what's going to affect the visibility are things like the distance, of course, but also terrain or vegetation or buildings that might impede on the view from the viewer's standpoint looking towards the wind farm, right?
Correct.
And the visibility of turbines will obviously change views towards and through the wind farm site, and it's going to alter the landscape, right?
Well, it certainly will, yes.
Yeah, and that's true of all wind farms, yes?
Pretty much, yes.
Yeah, and people are going to have different perceptions of, on different views about what they think about that change to their views of the landscape, right?
I agree, yeah.
Some people are going to see it as a blight on a landscape that they like or love or have grown up with, yes?
Correct.
And some people are going to see it as a desirable thing, if you like, a tangible change that helps deal with climate change issues, for example. Yes?
Well, I'd like to stick to just the visual aspect and not
fair enough.
Climate change, but yeah.
That's fair enough. That's fair enough. But some people are going to actually quite like them, and other people might be quite neutral about what they think about the appearance of a wind farm in the landscape. Would you agree with that?
I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, planning decisions in Victoria, I can't speak for New South Wales, but you're familiar, I take it, with and you've given evidence in planning cases in Victoria, so you would be familiar with the policy and planning guidelines for development of wind energy facilities in Victoria, yes?
Generally, yes, I am.
Generally, yes, and you're familiar with planning controls in clause 52.32 of the planning scheme that regulates and creates the permit trigger for wind energy facilities, yes?
Yes, I probably couldn't recite it verbatim, but I have seen it.
That's all right. I'm not going to ask you to do that. You'll be pleased to know. But what's apparent, isn't it, is that our planning system in Victoria makes it clear that one makes planning decisions not on the basis of subjective perception about the appearance of a new development in the landscape, but seeks objective planning decisions by reference to factors or criteria that's set out in the guidelines in the scheme. That's how it works, right?
Yes, but there seems to be an assumption there that the visual is always subjective. There are aspects of the visual that can be quite objective.
I agree with that, because people are going to have different views. So let's put aside wind farms. If a resident in my street doesn't like the look of the two-story extension out the back of the neighbour's house, they might not like the look of it, but that doesn't mean the extension doesn't have planning merit by reference to the objective criteria and factors set out in the planning scheme. Yes.
I'm sorry, Chair. I'll just object to the line of questioning, because the witness has been asked about planning law, and this expert is not here as an expert in planning law.
But it's a planning issue. You know, landscape landscape and visual impact is not an abstract exercise. Landscape and visual impact assessments have to be evaluated within the frame of reference from the planning scheme. It's a relevant question.
I think that the witness can be asked about the approach of his field of study as to whether it's subjective or objective, but questions about what the planning scheme intends, in my submission, is beyond what this witness can speak to.
Well, I withdraw the question. Can I put it this way? You gave expert evidence in the Delburn Wind Farm panel hearing, did you not?
Yes, I did.
And have you read the Delburn Wind Farm panel report?
No, I haven't had a chance to read that.
All right. Then let me find you and share this. Now, I hope you can see my screen. Do you see, this is page 62 of 208, I think. Can you see that, Dr. Williamson?
Yes, right.
And I don't particularly want to, I'm going to go back to the front of the document first, but can you see there's a heading here called planning policy? And they say that the planning system calls for an objective assessment of visual impacts. Do you see that?
That's correct, yeah.
And the assessment must be based on whether and how the value of the landscape is recognised and reflected in the planning schemes. Do you see that?
Yes.
So can I put it to you that the task of this inquiry here is to make an objective assessment of landscape and visual impacts by reference to what the planning scheme says about landscapes and views. It's not subject to any subjective evaluation of what people may think about the change in views or the change in landscapes. Do you agree with that?
Well, I agree with the proviso that that statement by the planning panel is taken in isolation. It doesn't necessarily cover all the points that were indicated in the environmental effects statement frame of reference that was laid out for this particular wind farm. So there are other aspects of visual effects, not just the planning scheme, that the Minister for Environment would be interested in.
So you say that, but ultimately, if so, let's put aside landscape and visual impact assessment. Let's talk about noise. So people can react differently to different sound levels and different frequencies of sound, can't they? Just on first principles, they can do that, right?
Well, yes, I assume so, but I'm not a noise expert.
I understand that, but neither am I. But we've had noise expert evidence in this case. And there's differences of opinion between the noise experts, but they're not complaining about, well, I think it's noisy, and someone else is saying, I don't think it is. They're doing objective evaluations assessment as to what the predicted impacts of the wind farm will be. Landscape and visual impact assessment has to be the same, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, and that's what I'm pointing out with the LVIA for the environmental effects statement, is that it was largely subjective. There wasn't a lot of sort of objective tracking of how the evaluations were made.
All right, so I think we're getting to a point that objectivity, if I understand your answer to the last question, that objectivity in the assessments is fundamental to the landscape and visual impact assessment required for a project like this, yes? In order to meet the planning scheme requirements.
As much as it can be, yes.
Yeah, okay. Now, let's have a bit of a chat about landscape sensitivity and its sensitivity to change. Now, you're quite critical of the approach adopted by Mr. Burge. He's ascribed, I think, if I understand it correctly, a landscape sensitivity rating to each of the landscape character units. Do I have, in broad terms, do I have that right? That's what he's done, and that's what you're critical of, or one of the things you're critical of?
Yes, that is one of the things I'm critical of.
Yeah, yeah. And on page 33 of your witness statement, if you let me get to it, I've got a hard copy. I can get it up on the screen if that's going to assist.
Sorry, which page is it? I've got it here.
Yeah, it's page 33, but it's not PDF 33. Okay. Which probably doesn't help anyone. Bear with me a moment and I'll see if I can get it up on the screen if that's going to assist.
Okay, I've got it.
You've got it?
Yeah.
Give me one moment, and it might just be easier for everyone if I can also screen share it. Okay, this is page 33 of your statement, and I just want to direct you to this paragraph here. Can you see that, Dr. Williamson?
The paragraph beginning with although?
Yes, correct. Okay. So you say, although the LVI indicates that the landscape character units and the landscape sensitivity ratings displayed in Table 6 form the basis of the visual impact of views from publicly accessible locations, you say, however, the LVIA does not apply the more typical and logical approach of rating the sensitivity level of different viewer groups or of different travel routes and use areas frequented by people with different activities and motives related to their appreciation of scenic quality. Now, as I understand what you're saying in that paragraph is that it's more typical, to use your expression, and logical to understand or appreciate people's perceptions of the scenic qualities and characteristics of a landscape. Yes?
Well, not their perceptions, what their
Yes.
relative, the general degree of concern for scenic
Right.
value.
Now, but the problem with that approach, isn't it, is that it does rely on subjective perceptions of landscape and how people feel about landscape changes. Yes?
No, I think you're mixing apples and oranges there.
Okay.
Perception of change is a different issue.
Yep.
From what the relative degree of concern might be.
Okay.
For the scenic landscape as viewed from different viewpoints.
All right. So it's understanding what people think about those relative changes or potential relative changes you think is a missing component of the LVIA.
Now if you're talking about the paragraph that I've got here, I'm talking about sensitivity level assessment of the viewpoints.
Yes.
And you're talking about the perception of the change. And that's a different issue.
All right. So
this is the problem, I think, with the sensitivity assessment within the LVIA report, is that it uses about 3 or 4 different definitions of what sensitivity is, but it doesn't assess all of those, and it really relies on the landscape character units as making that assessment.
Okay, so maybe I'll put this a different way. It asks for a logical approach of rating the sensitivity level of different viewer groups. So let's start with that. So a different viewer group might be immediate neighbours. A viewer group might be tourists. Are they examples of viewer groups for that you're referring to there in that paragraph?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, if you're looking at viewpoints or travel routes through the region, you look at those in terms of how those routes may be used and which routes are probably more often used by tourists as compared to general traffic.
Okay, Dr. Williamson, and then if continuing on that sentence, you refer to routes and use areas frequented by people with different activities and motives related to their appreciation of landscape scenic quality. Do you see that?
Yes.
So in order to understand on your method, the sensitivity level of different viewer groups and their motives and what they appreciate about the scenic quality of the landscape, you need to ask them, don't you?
Well, ideally, you would do some perception studies. Unfortunately, if these sorts of environmental effect statements and general visual assessments, we generally don't have the time or the budget to instigate those sorts of perception studies. So you have to use surrogate assumptions regarding the type of viewpoints that you're looking at.
So is your criticism here that the LVIA does not include perception studies?
Well, that's
of the different viewer groups.
Look, that was a minor criticism I had, that it didn't refer to any other perception studies in the LVIA, but that's not really what I'm talking about with this particular issue.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, if to going back to the points that we were discussing earlier about the need for objectivity in the assessment, it's hard to reconcile that with your view that an understanding of the motives and activities of individuals or individual viewers or viewer groups would be relevant to the planning assessment, because at the end of the day, as we discussed, some people are going to have positive views, some people will have negative views, and some people will be indifferent. Yes?
Well, I've already agreed to that, but the point that I'm trying to make is that there are certain viewpoints, such as that Boojbim World Heritage Area, or travel routes in which you've got a higher percentage of tourists using those routes to get to various tourist destinations, so forth. You've got a greater degree of chance that there are going to be more people with higher degrees of concern for enjoying scenery from those types of viewpoints than just general viewpoints. So,
well, sure, that you know, the scenic, if you like, the landscape sensitivity of Budgebin was described as being high in the LVIA. That's surely appropriate, just for the reasons you've described. Yes.
oh yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay.
That's just one example, however.
Oh no, I understand. Now, while we're discussing viewpoint selection and landscape sensitivity, in part 2.6 of the LVIA, Mr. Burge explains that he's used 4 criteria, and they were influenced in determining the overall assessment of the visual impact from the public domain. And he's had regard to visibility, distance, landscape character sensitivity, and viewer numbers. Do you recall that? Or do you want to get it out and have a look at it? I'll give you a moment to find it.
Yeah, if you just give me a second, please.
Yeah, sure. It's part 2.6. It's on page 16.
Perhaps Mr. Power, you can share that, please.
Yes, of course.
Thanks.
Can you see that, Dr. Williamson? Would you have it in front of you?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. And so these are the 4 criteria I was referring to: visibility, distance, landscape character, and sensitivity, and viewer numbers. Is this the black box or part of the black box that you were referring to earlier?
Well, it is in terms of when we go to the overall visual impact assessments that were given, that all of these factors, there's no way of seeing how all of these factors were weighed up in coming to the conclusion that they came to. And if you
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Pardon me.
I did. Sorry, I interrupted you. I didn't mean to. Please continue.
No, that's all right. And if you also then go to the scale of effects, which is indicated in that figure 2.1,
yep.
The scale of effects is also not always completely associated with all of these factors. It's mainly related to distance. Yes, I think this is part of the problems. These are all relevant factors, I agree, but they were not always clearly explained as to how they were weighed up or how they contributed to the particular assessment that was made for each viewpoint.
Okay. The method used by Mr. Burge for Willatook in this LVIA was more or less identical to the assessment approach he applied in Delbin, isn't it?
Pretty close, yes, I think.
Pretty close, yes. And what he explains on the next page, and I'll just scroll down, do you see this approach is discussed at length in this publication? It's called Guidelines for Landscape and Visual Impact Assessment, 3rd edition, specifically at these 3 sections, which is quoted below. Do you see that?
Yes.
And the approach that he's right to say, isn't it, that the approach that he's described in this section 2.6 is consistent with those guidelines, isn't it?
It's consistent with those guidelines. If you accept those guidelines, then the LVIA, the British UK guidelines for LVIA, I am very critical of, and quite a few other people are as well.
I understand that, but at Delbin, if I can you see this screen? This is page 56 of the Delbin panel report. You may not have read this. I'll just zoom it in so you can see it.
Yeah.
So do you see here, the panel said, under cross-examination, Dr. Williamson, you agreed the methodology adopted by Mr. Burge for overall impact assessment aligns with the UK guidelines that are widely adopted in Australia. And he clarified that his criticisms about the black box element applied to the methodology in the UK guidelines, not to the Delburn Wind Farm LVIA. I assume from that and from your answer to my previous question that your concerns about the black box element are as much criticisms of those guidelines as the work done by Mr. Burge, yes?
Well, Mr. Burge relies on those guidelines, and yes, I'm quite critical of those guidelines. So I'm not quite sure if I agree with what the panel has said there. I'd have to look at that and think about it a bit
Sure,
further.
I don't always agree with panels either, but that's okay. But the reality is that in that sentence, Dr. Williamson, you agreed that the methodology adopted by Mr. Burge aligns with the UK guidelines that are widely adopted in Australia. So by widely adopted in Australia, those UK guidelines are adopted or applied by planning authorities throughout Australia, yes?
Well, firstly, I'm not sure whether I said widely adopted. I said they're widely used.
Widely used,
and
okay.
There are a lot of younger landscape architects who don't have the experience with the visual management system approach, and they've only been exposed to the UK LVIA approach. So they just take it holus bolus and apply it. And to my mind, that particular approach has a lot of problems with it. If you want to go to my blog on my website, you can see all the problems that I've outlined with that. But
I don't have the time.
So
thank you.
Well, Mr. Burge has basically used that approach and relied on it. And what he's basically saying in that paragraph you pointed out in his statement is that all we need to do is give a verbal discussion generally and think about it in our minds, but not point out how different components of the assessment are connected to each other, or not indicate what the rules of combination may be. Now, if you look at some of the latest information regarding the UK guidelines, they're being panned by some landscape architects in the UK, as well as quite a few planning barristers have spoken out against the manner in which they're used. So
Dr. Williamson, I've been in this game for 30 years and I've never seen a landscape and visual impact assessment consultant agree on methodology in all my time. But can I put it to you this? You mentioned that the UK guidelines are widely utilised by, you said, young professionals in Australia. They're not only utilised by those professionals, but they're utilised by the planning authorities that make planning decisions on the basis of those LVIA assessments, yes, such as here.
Well, I don't see any reference in the Victorian guidelines that you have to use the UK LVIA guidlines.
I don't see any reference to the New South Wales guidelines in the Victorian guidelines either.
No, but if you go to the New South Wales guidelines, you'll find that they actually advocate more of a VMS approach than an LVIA approach. So, look, I agree that there's a lot of discrepancies between the way people use these methodologies, and it would be much better if there was some more consistency and agreement as to how things should be assessed. But if you're just asking me, my opinion is that this is not the best way to go.
Okay, but you do agree that the approach taken by Mr. Burge is consistent with those UK guidelines. You just object to the guidelines, the use of the guidelines.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Just while we're in your evidence in chief, you referred to the peer reviewer of Mr. Hark, and Mr. Hark, again, as is usually the way with LVIA experts, has some commentary about methodology, but if I just share screen this with you, if I can find it, make sure I'm looking at the right thing. So this is Mr. Hark's report. I'm right at the end of it, page 22. He's signed it, dated the 11th of April 2002. He's provided a summary, hasn't he? Did you read this when you had a look at his report?
I certainly had a look at that.
Yeah, so he's saying that the methods used are appropriate and in line with best practice and statutory guidelines. He says yes. I assume you disagree with that from your evidence earlier?
Yeah, I do. I don't understand with some of the other points that Mr. Hawk made in that peer review, how he can then turn around and come up with these sorts of conclusions. But
he's also agreed that the measures proposed to limit impacts are appropriate. I take it you disagree with that as well?
I think that you have to take that on a case-by-case basis.
Sure.
Yeah.
And the conclusions of the assessment are reasonable. I take it you disagree with that conclusion.
In some cases, yes, I do. We've done assessments. The assessment was done on particular viewpoints. We'd have to go through and look at particular viewpoints. As I mentioned in the beginning, I do have some examples there of places, viewpoints that I don't necessarily agree with that assessment, but I wouldn't possibly be in agreement with everything, but certainly some of it I would be.
All right. Now, one of the other things that the wind farm guidelines say, they talk about the sensitivity of the landscape to change. The other thing that's a relevant factor is visibility. And I just want to ask you some questions about that just to make sure we're on the same page, or at least it's clear in my head. Just give me a moment while I find the part of your statement I want to take you to.
And Mr. Powell, we'll wind up for a break after that question.
It's the start of a next series of questions. So actually now might be a good time to pause. If
okay, thank you.
Good timing. Thank you.
We'll come back at 11:40 a.m. Just reminding you, Dr. Williamson, you're under cross-examination, so not to communicate with your client or anybody else on this matter.
Okay.
Thank you. See you at 11:40. Thank you, everyone. Welcome back. We're continuing on questions of Dr. Williamson from Mr. Power.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Williamson, I just want to ask you some questions about visibility. And I'm asking these questions because the wind farm guidelines say that visibility of the project is one of the relevant factors in describing landscape impacts. Now, you included in your slide pack, and you also include on page 71 of your statement, table 6. It might assist if I can share it, I suppose. Bear with me. That's not, bear with me a moment. Here we go. Okay, I'll just zoom it a bit. Can you see that? This is table 5 and 6 of your witness statement. You're on mute, Dr. Williamson, sorry. Well, I can't hear you anyhow.
So, Dr. Williamson, I think you muted and you unmuted and muted yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So did you hear what I asked, or should I re-ask it?
Yeah, perhaps just re-ask it.
Yeah, okay. I just wanted to ask you some, I mentioned, well, put it to you really, that visibility is one of the relevant considerations under our wind farm guidelines for assessing landscape impacts and visual impacts. You agree with that?
Yes.
Yeah. And this table here compares, I'm sorry, there's 2 tables there. I'm really referring to table 6. And you compare your visual dominance ratings against Mr. Burge's zones of visual influence. Do you see that? And I just wanted to ask you a few questions about this table before I move on to the specific viewpoints. Can I ask firstly, what I've done is actually I've taken the distances from table 7 and written them down the side of table 6. So if I look at the first row here, Mr. Burgess dominates the landscape in which they are sited less than 5%. From your table 7, he says that's roughly 3 kilometres from the nearest turbine for a 250 metre turbine, whereas your extremely dominant VDL based on 5.5 degrees or greater is 2.6 kilometres. Do you see that?
Yes.
And they're roughly, and I think you acknowledged this in your evidence in chief, they're similar-ish, but then there's quite a divergence here, isn't it? The second one is highly visible and will usually dominate the landscape between 2 and 2.5 degrees. And that translates to about 3 to 6 kilometres from the nearest turbine. Do you see that?
That's right, yeah.
And then your highly dominant rating between 1.29 to 5.49 degrees translates to between 2.6 and 11.1 kilometres.
Right.
Now, I just wanted to test that with you, because what struck me about that is that by that criteria, on your criteria, that is, the vertical, your descriptor of highly dominant by reference to the view angle thresholds, that's the vertical view angle thresholds, is effectively going to be the same whether you're 2.7 kilometres or 11 kilometres away from the turbine. That seems quite a large distance to me, yes? Is that right? Is your view the visibility is going to be highly dominant regardless of whether you're 2.7 or 11 kilometres away?
Right. If I can just explain this a little bit further.
Sure.
What the figures in table 7 refer to my translation from the Sullivan research. If you'll note, there's also a statement on page 72 of my environmental witness statement that says for the 250 meter turbine that the lower visual angles below 0.35 degrees, i.e. beyond 40 kilometers, should be classified as inevident or insignificant. In some cases, they might be slightly apparent, but that mainly would be the case. However, in relation to the higher visual angles, that's where I think the LVIA has been a bit more lenient than I have. And under the right topographic conditions, they can create dominant visual magnitude or impact at distances up to, say, about 10 kilometers. So you could adjust those by shifting my my dominance descriptors up one level in the table that you're looking at. And what I've also said is that in between 10 to 40 kilometers, those turbines would be either visually apparent or discernible.
Sure.
And so, in effect, I think that the relative dominance is, except for differences in the closer distance zones, I think that the differences in dominance that are stated in the LVIA and what I'm stating are not that different, except that I would take them a bit further out than what's indicated here as being something that's important. Yeah. They come 6 kilometers, say, and I would certainly take it out further.
But on Dolben Wind Farm, you agreed to 6 kilometers, didn't you?
Look, I agreed to what in relation to that?
Dr. Williamson, do you see the Dolben Wind Farm report? This is on page 56.
Yeah.
You explained that Dr. Williamson's evidence was that a visual impact assessment should have been done for all dwellings within 6 kilometres of a turbine.
Okay.
So you and Mr. Burge agreed in your conclave statement for Dolben, did you not, that 6 kilometres was the appropriate distance from turbines to focus on the visual impact assessment, because they're the most impacted dwellings, yes?
Look, I agreed to that with Delburn because the terrain is much different in the Delburn case than it is in the Willatook case. Willatook is a much flatter terrain than Delburn. So that's, if we're looking at these tables, we're talking about if something's going to be, completely visible in flat terrain. Where you've got terrain coming in, that adds different complications or different factors that you need to consider. So what I'm talking about here is the Willatook one, and I would be looking at dwellings at least within 8 kilometers.
I'm not sure I follow, because these impact ratings in table 6 and 7. So I've read these as assuming that if a viewer of a 250 metre turbine from, say, 3 kilometres, so that's going to be higher than 1.29 degrees, and hence would be, under your characterisation, highly dominant, yes?
I think that's certainly be dominant to highly dominant, yes.
Yeah, well, just it's highly dominant based upon tables 6 and 7, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
As I just said a minute ago, you could possibly shift my ratings.
Okay, so putting aside the shifting of the ratings.
One notch.
Okay, putting aside the shifting of the ratings, but, and I actually do want to come back to that if we have time, but a viewer of a 250 metre turbine, based upon the tables that are there, applying your criteria, from 3 kilometres would be, you would characterise it as being highly dominant, a full view of a turbine.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah, that's going to be same at a 250 metre turbine at Willatook and a 250 metre turbine at Delburn, yes?
No, look, so I'm not quite sure what you're asking me here.
Well, these are objective criteria. You don't diddle them from one wind farm to the other, do you?
No, and I haven't. This is the same table that
you
I
have. You've applied 8 kilometres here, and you've applied 6 kilometres at Delburn.
Not in this table. I'm not saying anything about 8 kilometres.
No, not in this table. But if we go down here, you say, I do think they should give greater consideration and analysis to the visual effect of the proposed turbines on public and private dwelling viewpoints as set out as far at least 8 kilometres. And you've mentioned 8 kilometres again in your oral evidence just a few moments ago.
Right. Yes.
But I took you to Delburn, where in fact you had agreed there to 6.
Well, I thought I explained the difference there, and that has to do with terrain. The Delburn terrain is much more hilly. There's a lot more relative relief than there is at Willatook. Hence, at Willatook, you would be able to see these turbines over much longer distances and see the relative visual effect of that over the longer distances. I mean, if you had the right situation, you could see these turbines for much greater than that, and they could be dominant for more than 8 kilometres as well. But
there's no criteria.
What we're talking about is where we assess the dwellings. Okay, so what I said is in Willatook, I would be assessing dwellings out to at least 8 kilometres.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm not clear on is why, yes, you say terrain, it's hillier at Delburn than it is here. I don't know whether that's true or not, but let's assume for the sake of discussion that it is.
Well,
you've got objective, I'm not disagreeing with you, I just don't know. So I'm assuming for the sake of these questions that it is hillier. But you have objective criteria in table 6 and 7, but then you've decided that because Delburn's hillier, you don't have to look at dwellings. You can only focus on dwellings. You only need to focus on dwelling at 6 kilometres, whereas here, because it's flatter, I'll settle on 8. That's how it reads to me. Tell me what criteria you've applied and where that's set out in this statement here to differentiate between the two.
Well, it boils down to what I had just said, that in the Delburn area, because of the terrain, views get cut off much more readily, so you're not seeing as much of the turbine. beyond 6 kilometers. So in that particular case, I accepted that, yeah, 6 kilometers was probably a reasonable cutoff for Delbrin. However, I do think that with Willatook, because the terrain is much flatter, that you're going to have greater visibility of these turbines, a greater chance that you're going to see a larger percentage or proportion of the wind turbines from further out than you would in the Delbrin case.
Yeah,
so,
and you're sorry,
so,
keep going.
so all of these tables, both Mr. Burge's assessments and my assessments are both looking at the degree of the subtended angle of view caused by the 250 meter turbine, assuming a totally flat landscape.
Yeah, your 8 kilometre limit is somewhere. If I go to table 7, sorry, I'm on the right hand column. So your 8 kilometre limit is somewhere in this level, 1.29 to 5.9 degrees. It's going to be somewhere in between those two metrics, right? Yeah. Which is your highly dominant visual level. So that's where you would draw the line, and you'd focus more intensively on views within that line than outside it, right?
Yeah, I think for the most part. I mean, it could be dominant to highly dominant. It'll vary depending on the particular viewpoint and what the viewing situation is.
Okay. Let me just organise myself. I'm going to go on to the next topic. Okay. I just want to ask you some questions now about significant views and vantage points. Now, you have some criticisms in your witness statement about the exclusion or treatment of certain viewpoints. So I'm starting from page 36 of your witness statement. And you describe a significant landscape viewpoints. You talk about Budge Bim, and I'll come back to that shortly. Mm-hmm. You say, you talk about Surprise Lake. You talk about Willatook Hall and some of the CFA stations. You talk about the Tower Hill. Now, Tower Hill's been assessed here, hasn't it? In the LVIA?
Well, it has, although the photographs used for the assessment, I had some
yeah.
With, yeah.
So while we're discussing, no, I'm going to come back to photographs, but I'll get some images in front of us and then we can have an informed discussion. But remind me to come back to that. When discussing, you've included towns and roads. Would you describe towns and roads as being a significant landscape or vantage point?
Well, it certainly can be. I mean, as I had indicated with the example that I gave, different roads would have different sensitivity levels.
Yep.
So, sorry, what you're talking about? Significant vantage points, significant viewpoints in the
yeah.
That
yeah.
Mr.
You've included roads, and the CFA hall as being a significant vantage point, and I was just quite surprised at that.
Well, what I'm saying is that they could be of a higher sensitivity level because you got more community members gathering around those points than other places.
Okay, let's talk about the Great Ocean Road. Now, you mentioned in your evidence in chief, and you say on your report on the top of page 25 that the Great Ocean Road is not referenced in the LVIA. Now, Mr. Burge in his reply statement explains, of course, that there are viewpoints that were assessed in the LVIA from the Princess Highway. Now, he's right about that, isn't he?
Could you point me to the place where I said that the Great Ocean Road?
Top of the page. So there's no reference to see the heading, no reference to the Great Ocean Road. Should I zoom in? Would that be easier?
Yeah, I'm not saying the Great Ocean Road. I'm saying the Great Ocean Road National Landscape as appeared on that map that I gave in my presentation.
Yeah. Well, the Great Ocean Road National Landscape, most people see that landscape when they're driving along the Princes Highway, don't they? And they get out and have a look at the coast and have a look at what's around. Might have a look at Yambuck and Codrington wind farms, perhaps. Yes?
Within that landscape, yes.
Yeah. And there are within the LVA, are there not, viewpoints that have been assessed from the Great Ocean Road or adjacent to it, within the Great Ocean Road National Landscape, right?
Look,
That's true.
I agree that he had, in fact, all of his viewpoints would be within that landscape. What I'm saying is that he did not reference that was a significant landscape. That's the point I'm trying to make. I didn't say he didn't assess viewpoints within that.
Okay, but there's no reason to think, is there, that it's going to have a significant impact on the Great Ocean Road. This project's going to have a significant impact on the Great Ocean Road National Landscape, surely.
Well, I don't know why you would make that assumption.
All right. Let's talk about Budge Bim. You talk about the Budge Bim Cultural Landscape World Heritage Area. And I think it's common ground between us all that is a significant vantage point. It's a significant cultural and scenic aspect of element of the landscape. But you take issue here with the LVIA, don't you, about the fact that there hasn't been a reference to the inscription of Budge Bim on the World Heritage List. Is that your primary concern in this first paragraph here?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Is that there just seemed to be an understatement of the significance of that particular landscape, in that it was in the environmental effects statement or the appendix to that. It was only referred to as the Budge Bim cultural landscape. It was not referred to as a World Heritage landscape, which is obviously of international significance.
Sure, but can you see section 5.6.3 of the LVIA on the screen in front of you?
Yes.
Dr. Williamson? So it's headed UNESCO Cultural Landscapes. It says Budge Bim and Lake Condah are also recognised by UNESCO as a culturally significant landscape. So UNESCO is a United Nations organisation, yes?
Look, I agree with that, but a lot of people reading that wouldn't really know what that means.
Yeah,
and
okay.
So all I'm saying, and it might be a minor point in the overall, but in terms of going to comprehensiveness and being completely upfront, I think we just need to recognize that this is a World Heritage area, and it is of international significance, not just local or state.
Can you see figure 5-11?
Yeah.
And can you see where my mouse is? UNESCO World Heritage List.
Right.
And you see in the legend of figure 5-11, Budge Bim Cultural Landscape inscribed on the World Heritage List in 2019.
Yes, I did miss that.
And you see World Heritage Area boundary, which is the red line on figure 5-11.
Right, okay.
So can I put it to you that that is not a very fair criticism of the LVIA?
Well, perhaps. I just think it should have been in the text as well.
Okay. But it's evident, isn't it, that if there's a map of the Budge Bim, the area, the map is and references is labelled UNESCO World Heritage Area. I'm putting it to you that a reasonable reader of this section would understand that Budge Bim is on the World Heritage List. You'd agree with that, surely?
Well, if they read the fine print in that map, yes.
Okay. All right. I'm going to stop sharing from. Yeah, keep going.
I mean, I may have missed that in the map. I was reading through his text, and that was what I was referring to.
Okay, that's fine. We've cleared it up. That's all I'm trying to do.
Okay.
Bear with me a moment. I'm just looking for. While we're on Budge Bim, okay. Now, this is your figure 14,
That's right.
and this is from your viewpoint 60 from Lake Gorrie Road, the Budge Bin World Heritage Area, looking southeast. In other words, that's looking from this viewpoint towards the project. Yes?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, okay. Now, Mr. Burge, in his reply statement, oh, sorry, I'm probably going to give people that looked at that, and he endeavoured to identify the approximate viewpoint from where you took that figure 14 photograph. And this is the Lake Gorrie Road. That's that you took that image on the Lake Gorrie Road, yes?
That's correct, yeah.
And he said he thinks it's about here, next to the Lake Gorrie Swamp. Is he right there, or about
Pretty
right?
close. Probably just slightly further north than that, but it's within that
Okay.
section along the road, yes.
Okay. So when you had your, let's go back to the image. Bloody hell. Excuse me. Sorry. So you've got the camera. Did you take this photo?
I
Or
did.
someone else? You took
Yeah,
it.
I did. Yeah.
And so you had your camera, and you're on the Lake Gorrie Road, but the road isn't in this image. So I assume the road is behind you or to your right as you took this image, yes?
Well, I'm standing on the road probably.
Okay, so you're standing on the road, looking southeast. And so if I look at the map on Mr. Burge's reply statement, that in fact, Budge Bin, when you took that image, was behind you. Yes?
Well, look, it's hard to tell from these maps precisely where the line is drawn, but it is from the vicinity of the edge of Budge Bin boundary.
Yeah, I mean it's not rocket science, Dr. Williamson. You're about there, maybe a bit north on the Lake Gorrie Road, taking an image looking southeast.
Yeah.
And Budge Bin is to the west and northwest where you took that image. In other words, it's behind you when you took that photograph. Yes.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I can see someone has the hand up, Mr. Chairman. Can I keep going, or? Oh, it's gone.
Just check in case it's a technical issue, if you don't mind.
No, that's fine.
Just trying to find the hand. Is still up. Seems to have been lowered. Ms. Johnson, did you have a question or a technical issue? I'll take those notes. Please continue, Mr. Power.
Okay, thank you, sir. And your image, the point that Mr. Burge makes in his reply statement is that Budge Bin is behind you when you took this photo, and this is an image that's looking over farming zone. That's right, isn't it?
Well, yeah. Are you talking about the planning zone, or what are you talking about?
Yeah, I'm talking about the planning zone, the mine planning scheme, the farming zone.
Well,
So
it may be, I'm not quite sure.
Let's have a squeeze. I'll stop sharing so I don't make everyone queasy. This is easily fixed or clarified.
I mean, I'll take your word for it. If you say it's in the farming zone, it probably is. So that's fine. We don't need to waste time on that.
Okay. That's good. Thank you for that, because it is. I'll take you to page 25 of your statement next, if we may, and I'll get it up on the screen when I find it, but you can look for it in the meantime.
All right, I've got it.
Thanks, and I'll just get it up on the screen. All right. Now, after a discussion about Budge Bin, you refer to the discussion in section 6.4 about intangible cultural heritage, but you comment, I'm not sure whether it's a criticism or not, but you comment that the LVIA defers to ecology and heritage partners who have done a technical appendix of the EES. It's Appendix J for the inquiry's reference. Have you read Appendix J of the Willatook Wind Farm EES?
I've had a quick read through it.
Okay, so it's pretty clear from that Appendix J, isn't it, that the authors of that report undertook pedestrian surveys by archaeologists and traditional owners across the site. Yes, that's what that report says. Do you remember that?
That's right.
Yeah. And it says that what's called complex assessments, which is essentially intrusive archaeological assessments, were carried out at some locations with the traditional owners. Do you recall that part of Appendix J?
I roughly recall that, yes.
Yeah. So there can be no suggestion, can there, that there hasn't been any, not merely consultation, but involvement of traditional owners in understanding the cultural heritage features of the project site, can there?
By ecology and heritage partners, you mean?
By ecology and heritage partners and the proponent.
Yeah, sure.
And the EES also has a chapter dedicated to consultation, does it not?
I assume it does. Yes, I think that's right. I haven't read through that, but
Okay. So you wouldn't be surprised, I suppose, that that chapter describes the consultation that's been done by the proponent with various stakeholders, including traditional owners. Yes.
no, I wouldn't be surprised at that.
You haven't read it. Okay. I don't think I can take this topic any further. I'll make submissions on this.
I do think that the ecology and heritage partners referred to those consultations in their report, if I'm not wrong.
I think they refer to the consultations that have been undertaken up to that time. But what they also do they not, is itemise in quite detail what pedestrian surveys were undertaken and the traditional owners that accompanied them during those surveys, don't they?
I guess so, yes. I think
Yeah.
they did.
Yeah, I think they do too. All right. Let's go to page 21 of your witness statement. I'll just find it for us and I'll get it back up on the screen. You see, this is a section 3.5 of your statement, scenic and landscape values and significance. The first discussion is about the planisphere, significant landscapes and views. Do you see that?
Yes.
And this is your discussion about the LVIA's treatment of the planisphere Southwest Landscape Assessment Study, amongst other things,
Yeah.
but primarily that, yes, on this page.
Right, yes, okay.
And you observe rightly that on the bottom paragraph, do you see this planisphere Southwest Landscape Assessment Study also identified the Western Cone and lava flows as a significant landscape of state significance? Do you see that? And you would, and then
Sorry, which paragraph are you in?
Yeah. So can you see my mouse?
Yes. Okay.
Okay. So it's here. Sorry, Dr. Williamson.
No, that's fine.
Can you see that?
I'm looking at two screens at the moment, so.
Yeah. No. That's that's fine. So. Okay. And we're agreeing on this, by the way. So it's not a trick question, that the Planisphere Southwest Landscape Assessment Study identifies the Western Cone and lava flows as a significant landscape of state significance.
Yes.
And then at the bottom of the page, you say, these are highly significant landscape features from a geologic and landform standpoint. So in other words, the value of those landscapes is their intrinsic geologic and landform characteristics, isn't it? That's what gives them the value. Yes?
I'd say primarily, yes.
Okay. And I think you and I would be in agreement on that. Have you had a chance of reading Appendix G of the EES?
Which?
So beg your pardon. So Appendix G is the geoscience assessment of this project. Have you had a chance of reading that?
Look, I've had just a very quick read of that. I've got a copy of it here.
Yeah. I'm not going to take you to the report. If you haven't read it or only scanned it, that's fine. But Professor Rosengren, if you've had a quick scan of it, Professor Rosengren has examined and has evaluated the effects of the project on the geomorphology, if I can call it that, of the volcanic landforms within the Western Cone and lava flows, yes?
Yes, I believe that's what he did in that report.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So it's not right to say that it might not have been addressed to your satisfaction in the LVIA, but there are other sources of relevant information in the EES, such as Professor Rosengren's report. Yes.
Yeah. Well, what Neville didn't assess was I don't believe anyway, is the visual aspect.
Sure.
Of that.
Sure, but the visual aspect is addressed, is it not, in the LVIA and in your witness statement?
It's addressed in the LVIA in what way? I'm not quite sure.
Well, it's addressed extensively in the LVIA, is it not?
Well, it's mentioned, but I'm not quite sure how it was included in the assessment itself.
It's not merely mentioned, but there's pages about the planisphere and the geomorphology assessment. Yes.
Oh yeah, sure, but not all of the planisphere recommendations were adopted because in terms of his significant landscape features,
yeah,
what he adopted was the significant landscape overlay from the planning scheme.
I think in your statement, I can find the reference if we need to, but your statement correctly, I'd suggest, explains that study, it was envisaged that study would be converted into planning controls, yes?
That's right.
Yeah, and that's not happened, has it?
Not in that particular case. The lava flows were not included in the Moyne Shire planning scheme.
Okay.
And I don't know what the reason for that is. But...
Me neither. Bear with me a moment. Sorry, I've just been going to the right page, but on the wrong document. I want to next take you to page 40 of your witness statement. Get in there. Can you see that, and ask you some questions about townships?
Right.
Now, I think you say that the LVI's selection of viewpoints and its treatment is generally acceptable. You suggest a greater emphasis on highway approaches, but you take issue, don't you, with the what you describe as the panoramic sweep of the photography used in the assessment of townships, and actually that's a observation you make around a number of the images presented in the LVIA. Yes.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Well, you talk about this paragraph, the view from the corner of Norromuck and Ryans Road as presented in figures 8-24 through 8-26, that's of the LVIA, rightly focus on the direction of the proposed Willatook wind farm, but do not include, I beg your pardon, I've mixed it up, do not include the full panoramic sweep to the northwest or right of the scene, where almost the full extent of the MacArthur wind farm turbines are visible at similar distances. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay, now I'll stop sharing because I want to go to those images if I can. And you'll have to give me a moment to find it. Okay, can you see those?
I can, yeah. If you can enlarge it up, could you enlarge it up slightly?
Yeah, of course I can.
Thank you.
Is that any better?
Yeah, that helps.
So figure 8-24 is the view taken from just to the, what I assume is the east of the intersection of these two roads. This is Ryan's Road and Norimak Road, looking west. And figure 8-25 is a montage. It's very hard to see in the report, but it's much easier to see in the map book. Have you looked at these montages in the map book?
I haven't looked at, no, I don't think I've looked at them in the map book.
Yeah, okay. And then what Mr. Burge has done is done a close-up, so we can see much more clearly the Ryan's Road and Norimak Road signposts, for example.
Right.
Now, in your images, I'll stop sharing for a moment and go to figure 17A. Now, it looks like what you might have done is you've walked a little further west, and you've taken this image. It might be zoomed in a bit too much here. I'll zoom out so we can, and you're looking southwest. So that's how it looks to me. I don't think it matters much, but can you confirm whether or not that's actually what you've done in taking this image?
It might be in slightly different location than him, but I think from both locations you could probably see pretty much the same thing.
Yeah, and you've from this image, you've sort of looking to the southwest to west, and you can see turbines off in the distance there. That's MacArthur Wind Farm, I assume.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. So when this observation you make about the photography, and that you criticize the nature of the photography that's been used by Mr. Burge, I mean, there are, to be fair to him, he has he not, undertaken, presented images that present, if you like, the panorama to reflect the fact that people aren't usually static, and their heads move and their eyes move and take in what's around them, as well as the more zoomed image. They both have their virtues and their limitations, do they not?
Well, yes, but the panorama is created with 70 mil lens, that you end up with a much more extended panorama than you do with, say, a 50 mil lens.
Yeah.
So it does tend to stretch out and flatten the image quite a lot compared to other lenses, and compared to when you're just looking at the, say, 60-degree view versus a 110 or more.
Sure, but what's the what Mr. Burge has done in these and many other simulations and images he's presented the panoramic view, and I assume it's this type of image which you say flattens the landscape. Is that what you're saying? Do I understand that right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. But then what he's also done is he's presented in the zoom image, which, and I'd suggest to you that image, figure 8-26, does not have that type of flattening characteristic that you're concerned about, yes?
Well, yeah, but I think in this particular example, what I was saying, does he have another 60-degree view that swings to the northwest?
Not from this location, to my knowledge, no.
Yeah, well, I think that's what I was pointing out, was that this image here does not really take in a view to those other wind farms, the other wind turbines, as you would in the panorama. So you're not seeing them to the extent that you would in that panorama.
Yeah, sure, but okay, fair enough. But Mr. Burge, in his assessment, his visual impact assessment, has stated, and this here, has he not, just above at the top of, what page are we on? Page 110. He said that the MacArthur Wind Farm, which is situated to the west, that's the west of the town, northwest of the town, is visible from elevated locations, parts of the northern and southern town entrances and locations to the west. So he is explaining, is he not, that MacArthur is visible from certain locations in and in the immediate environs of the Hawkesdale Township, yes? It's not been ignored.
Oh, no, I didn't say that he ignored it in the text. I'm just saying the photograph doesn't show it.
Yeah, but see, if I'm going to go back to section 2.6, I'll stop sharing so I don't give everyone a heebie-jeebies as I go around the document. And the quotes. We were discussing this earlier, there are extracts from the UK guidelines. Now, I know you don't like the UK guidelines, but I don't know, the inquiry might like them, they might not. So let's assume for the sake of this discussion that the guidelines are relevant guidelines for the assessment of LVIAs. 3.35 identifies a number of issues in reporting on the significance of the identified effects. The main aim should be to draw out the key issues. And the text goes on, this requires clear and accessible explanations, and they identify potential pitfalls such as over-reliance on matrices or tabular summaries. Do you see that?
Right, yeah.
A failure to distinguish between significant effects that are likely to influence the eventual decision and those of lesser concern. Yes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And losing sight of the most glaringly obvious significant effect because of the complexity of the assessment. But then paragraph 3.36 says to overcome these potential problems, there should be more emphasis on narrative text describing the landscape and visual effect and the judgments made about their significance. Now, in the example that we've just taken you to, okay, figures 8-24 to 26 may not present an image to the northwest as you would like, but the narrative text does describe, and the text does evaluate the effect of MacArthur Wind Farm and the potential cumulative effects of MacArthur Wind Farm in this project, doesn't it? Consistent with this type of requirement in the guidelines.
In a verbal way, it's very difficult to see how that's incorporated in his assessment table that he's got underneath that text, however.
Well, let's go back to that. So what's your concern about this? I'm getting it back up on the screen. So he said, the MacArthur Wind Farm is visible to the west and northwest. You would agree with that? They're obviously, that's self-evident from the photographs you presented in your statement and in the LVIA.
He says it's visible. He doesn't indicate the degree of visual effect that it has, what the dominance level of that may be, and how that then also combines in a cumulative way with the proposed Willatook turbines.
Okay. He does discuss cumulative issues, but I'm going to get onto that later. His ZVI, applying his ZVI, he says it's notable and can dominate the landscape. Do you see that?
Well, that's in relation to Willatook, I understand.
Well, I'm not sure that's exactly right, but let's, because it's headed cumulative considerations. Do you see that?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is a evaluation of cumulative effects.
Well, supposedly, yes, but he's referring to distance in that particular factor, and the distance is the 10.6 kilometers, which is the closest turbine in Willatook. It's not really specifically talking about MacArthur. And this is part of the problem with his assessment tables. You have difficulty knowing exactly what he's talking about or what he's considered in his evaluation.
Well, it's under the heading cumulative consideration, so one can draw an inference from that, can't they?
Well, I don't think you can necessarily say that that particular table is talking about cumulative. It's talking about the distance, the ZVI, which is his table that he assesses what the relative visual effect would be for a turbine that's 10.6 kilometers away.
All right.
So the MacArthur turbines are various distances from that. So how that relates to the cumulative is very difficult to tell.
Okay. Give me a moment. I'm just looking for something. Sorry, I'm just finding page numbers on multiple documents, so please bear with me, Dr. Williamson and members of the inquiry. I don't think I've got too much longer. I hope. There's a discussion of local roads on page 47 of your witness statement, and you acknowledge that the LVIA reports assesses 4 viewpoints along local roads. You don't have any problems with those, but you think more should be included. Is that the nub of what you're saying in that first paragraph under the heading local roads? Take a moment to read it.
Yeah, I think you've read that accurately. Yes.
So are you expecting all local roads need to be assessed?
Not all local roads, but I think there are certain other ones, and I've mentioned them in the next sentence there.
Yeah.
Certain other ones that perhaps should have been included.
Okay, so let's just have a think about that. One of the local roads assessed in the LVIA is Tyrone North Road. I might just reduce that a little bit. This is viewpoint 3, and he describes, Mr. Burge, sorry, describes the viewpoint 3 as about 500 metres south of Reardon's Road and at the intersection of Reardon's Road and Tyrone North Road. Have you driven along Tyrone North Road?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. And the image he presents in figure 8-83 is looking west through to north through the project. So that'd be looking, if you follow my cursor, roughly along the road and taking in this part of the project. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yep. And then he's turned around and he's taken another image looking north through to northeast through the project site, and that'd be presumably to take in potential impacts of turbines at this, what I've been calling the eastern group of the wind farm. Can you see those?
Yes.
Now, the nearest turbine, he explains, is 1.9 kilometres to the northwest. And under your table 6 criteria, you would describe that as being the turbines being visually extremely dominant from that location, yes?
They could be, yes.
Yeah, because there isn't any vegetation or terrain or something that's going to significantly block views from the turbines from that spot, are there? Certainly not looking to the northwest.
Not in these images, no.
Yeah, so and I know you don't like his method, but he's actually concluded, applying the ZVI, that the turbines will always be visually dominant, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so we can go and assess other local roads with clear views towards the turbines, but they're essentially not going to be any more significant than the assessment for Tyrone North Road, are they? Because they're all close, and if there are unobstructed views towards the turbines on any of those local roads, the ZVI is going to conclude that they're always visually dominant. That's more likely than not going to be the case, right?
Well, depending on any intervening terrain or vegetation.
Sure.
Yes. I think
yes.
the point I was trying to make there was that there were also other more critical viewpoints along Tyrone North Road that could have been included in the report, which weren't. He's taken it from the extreme south end of that road. And there are other places, if you go over the hill to the north, about sort of midway along that road, there's places where you're going to get pretty close to 270 degrees of the panorama that are going to be filled with those sorts of highly dominant turbines.
Sorry, I can't let this go. Let's go back to this. Isn't that what he's done here? So he's looking from the west through to north with a panorama of turbines there, and he's looking north through to northeast through the panorama of turbines there. That is I'd suggest to you a conservative. I withdraw that. That is a viewpoint where there will be the turbines will be close, and they'll be visible to the north, to the west and northwest, and they'll be visible to the northeast, won't they? That's a high impact.
All I'm saying is that
location.
this is the impact from this viewpoint would not be as great as it is from some other viewpoints along Tyrone North Road. So I just was really just questioning why some of those other more critical viewpoints. A similar thing occurred along Woolsthorpe Haywood Road as well, where photo montage was selected from a point which wasn't as critical as some other points.
Yeah. But you've agreed with me that in terms of looking at other local roads in the immediate vicinity of the project, that they might have visually dominant impacts, but depending upon whether there's intervening vegetation or terrain. Yes, you agreed with that a moment ago?
Yes, yeah.
And that if that's the case, then it might be that the impacts will not always be visually dominant. Yes?
Again, each viewpoint is
each viewpoint's different. Yeah. So in your statement, you're critical of viewpoint 1, but you haven't included, have you, an analysis that of another location on Tyrone North Road, or an image that has a greater impact than viewpoint L3, have you?
I thought I did include a photograph from Tyrone North Road that showed a place where you're going to get sweeping panoramic views. I'm pretty sure that I've got that in there.
Okay, so is your concern that there are going to be sweeping panoramic views of the wind farm on Tyrone North Road?
Look, what I was doing here was I'm not trying to get down to a visual impact analysis of my own. What I'm doing is a peer review of the LVIA that was done for the environmental effects statement. And generally, when you're doing a visual impact assessment, you're trying to identify those places where you've got the worst case, where the greatest impacts are going to occur. And what I'm saying is that some of the photographs that were used, some of the photo montages that were selected, the viewpoints are not necessarily representing the worst case or some of the higher visual impact situations that could occur. So all I'm saying is that is a discrepancy or an inadequacy of this particular LVIA.
But in this particular viewpoint, sorry, we've got to be clear on this, because it's very easy for someone to drive around the countryside taking happy stamps. But essentially, what's been done on viewpoint L3 is that a 180-degree image has been taken to collect views from the central cluster of turbines and the eastern cluster of turbines. And the conclusion is that that's got a high visual impact. And that's correct, isn't it? And that's going to be the same for your viewpoint. It's going to be a similar conclusion, is it not?
But going to be high, but what he's not including there is the sweep. And if you look at the number of turbines that are going to be seen from one particular viewpoint will be less in this viewpoint that you've got in his report than the one that I talked about in my report. So yeah, look, in essence, you're right that if they're going to be seen within that foreground distance, they're going to have a high or dominant visual impact if they're not obscured by terrain or vegetation.
That's right, and it doesn't matter from where you take the image from on Tyrone North Road, that conclusion is not going to change, is it? If provided, subject to the qualifier, that there's no intervening structures or vegetation or terrain that impede the view, yes?
Yeah, I think, look, we're in agreement on that. The point,
and it's the same for the other local roads, isn't it? Yes?
it will vary from viewpoint to viewpoint. And that's what I'm saying. I think he should have included additional viewpoints from other local roads. That's all I'm saying.
While we're talking about additional viewpoints, I'll go on to dwellings. In Delburn, as I understand it from the panel report, your evidence was that, as I recall it, at least 50% of dwellings should be, you've not said this in your statement, but you apparently said it in Delburn, that at least 50% of dwellings should be assessed, yes?
Well, I probably somewhere around that. It's always difficult to give an exact percentage, but in that neighborhood, yes, I think so. I think, you know, you should be looking at all of them in a desktop study, but in terms of the ones that you might include with photographs and site visits and so forth, I think, you know, in that neighborhood probably is a good thing to do.
Okay, so we've got about 122 dwellings, non-stakeholder dwellings, should I say, within about 6 kilometres of the turbines here. So is your evidence really that we need to assess 60 or 61 dwellings? Is that what you're saying?
I didn't say that in my evidence at all, did I?
No, you didn't, but I'm applying your Delburn principle. 50% of dwellings within 6 kilometres, 50% of dwellings within 6 kilometres, 50% of 122 dwellings equals 61.
Look, that's a rough yardstick, and I'd appreciate that. You know, I've responded to this particular case, not Delburn, so I'd appreciate if we could stick to talking about Willatook and not Delburn in this particular case. I think what I was saying is that I think there should have been more of these residents, and there were a number of residences that were not assessed that probably should have been.
In Delburn,
particularly in those areas beyond 6 kilometres, 6 to 8 kilometres. Well, we've already discussed why I've said that.
Dr. Williamson, you're taking very long pauses there. I keep assuming you're finished. Sorry.
Sorry.
Intentionally stopping you. Just sort of pause and then you start again. Just Mr. Power, if you're going to go longer than 5 minutes, we should call lunch between now and 5 minutes. Just not to rush you.
I will go longer than 5 minutes, sir.
This is a good point to take a lunch break.
Yep.
Any line of questioning?
Yep.
Thank you. All right, well, Dr. Williamson, we'll take a break for an hour. We'll reconvene at 1:40 p.m.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Welcome back. Right, we'll just wait to see if Dr. Williamson on the screen. Oh, sorry, he's already here. Apologies for that. Still getting used to Zoom. We'll continue on questions of Dr. Williamson from Mr. Power. Thank you.
Can you hear me okay? Okay.
Yes, thanks, Dr. Williamson. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
My Zoom crashed over lunch, so that's all good. Now, I started asking you questions about dwelling viewpoints, but something occurred to me after lunch that I just want to ask you about budge BIM, if I may. Are you familiar with the statement of outstanding universal value for the budge BIM cultural heritage landscape?
Well, I'm familiar with that context or framework for assessment for World Heritage assessments. Yes. I haven't read the details for budge BIM.
Okay. Well, if you haven't read it, I won't bother questioning you about it. But it's right, isn't it, that it was inscribed in the World Heritage List in 2019?
I believe that's the correct date.
Yeah. And at the time of its inscription on the World Heritage List, MacArthur Wind Farm was already there, was it not?
Look, I'm not quite sure, but I imagine so, yes.
Yeah. And we've heard from the council and from others that there are other wind farms which have been approved through the planning process prior to 2019 in the vicinity of Budge Bim. Is that right?
Well, I don't know which ones they're referring to. Can you help me out with that?
Yeah. Okay. So would you be, well, let's start. So you're concerned about the potential effects of Willatook on Budge Bim. So how about Ryan Corner, which is adjacent, almost adjacent to this project to the south? Are you familiar with Ryan Corner?
Yes, I am familiar with where it's supposed to be.
Yes.
I haven't read all of the environmental effect statements, but it's a little bit further away than Willatook.
It's a little bit further away than Willatook, but it was also approved long before Budge Bim was included on the World Heritage List, wasn't it?
Mm, yeah.
Yeah. All right. I won't belabor the point. I'll go back to dwellings and I'll make submissions on that point later. Now, just prior to lunch, I asked you a question in relation to Delbin. I think I might have misspoke. So I want to clarify your evidence in that matter. In that matter, what the panel report for Delbin reported is that you expressed the opinion that assessing views from 30% of dwellings within 6 kilometres of that wind farm was appropriate because that wind farm, I think I'm right in saying, was within a timber plantation. Is that my recollection correct?
Well, there's a timber plantation within that area, yes.
Yes. And the panel reported that your evidence was that in more open areas that you should assess 50% of dwellings within 6 kilometres, yes?
I may have said that. I can't recall exactly, but
yeah.
It could have been.
Yeah. Would Willatook qualify in your view as an open area that meets your 50% Delbin test?
Well, I think I've already described it as an area with lower terrain. So yeah, it's a more open area.
But you're not. Sorry, I didn't need to interrupt. Go ahead.
No,
but you're not suggesting here that the only way we can have a legitimate LVIA for Willatook is to go and do landscape and visual assessments for 60 dwellings, surely. That's not what your statement says, is it?
Well, I don't know. I didn't say that, but you're asking the question, right?
Well, your statement doesn't say that it should be 50% of dwellings within 6 kilometres, does it?
No, I think what I said was that there possibly were other dwellings that should have been assessed.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry, you keep going. I don't
No,
need to
that's all right. No.
And in table 3, you list those dwellings on page 53 of your statement.
Well, I've listed dwellings that I reviewed in the field.
Yeah, okay.
There are other dwellings there that I wouldn't have reviewed.
Sure. So with your 23 plus however many number, Mr. Burge, there must be subtract that from 60 and you've got the missing dwellings, so to speak, yes?
Yeah, I mean, I think on one of the maps, I've included some of the other dwellings that may exist.
All right. You, on page 72 of your statement, no, that's not right, bear with me. On page 74 of your witness statement, you explain that you undertook a cursory examination of the dwellings listed in table 3. Do you see that?
Yes.
And you did that on the 21st to the 25th of September, 2022?
That's correct.
And how did you do that? So there's 23 dwellings in table 3, isn't there? Or about 20 odd dwellings. Did you visit them all in one day, or did you visit 3 in one day or 5 on next? How did you go about that exercise, Dr. Williamson?
Well, I just trying to remember days of the week. I think I visited the bulk of them on the would have been the 22nd, I believe. I think that was a Thursday.
Yeah.
So most of them during that time, but there were a few others, particularly up in the sort of northwestern part of the study area that I visited on would have been on grand final day, which would have been the Saturday.
Right, the Saturday. Okay.
Yeah.
So by the majority, roughly what, half, 2/3, 3/4 would you have visited on the Thursday and the balance on the Saturday?
Probably something like that. Yeah, probably 3/4 roughly. I don't have the exact number, but
No, that's fine. That's fine. I only asked because document 40 just suggested that you did it on one day, which was the 21st of September. And I just wanted to clarify exactly what you were doing over the 5 days. So 2 of the 5 days you inspected some of the dwellings. Is that your evidence?
yeah, I think what I meant by the 21st to the 25th is that was when I conducted the field trip.
Yeah.
I drove out on the 21st. I think I did.
You just drove around. Yeah.
Trying to recall. Yeah, I did actually. 21st, give me a second. Yeah, look, basically when I looked at the residences, it would have been over 2 days. Yeah. I was in the field for those 4 days.
Okay. All right. Now, I'd like to just explore, well, first of all, before I do that, you've noticed that Mr. Burge has provided a response in his reply statement to each of the dwellings listed in table 3 of your statement. Have you seen that?
I haven't had a chance to review it. No.
Okay. All right. Well, I won't ask you any questions about it then. I'll take you now, please, to page 54 of your statement. And
sorry, can I just correct myself on that? I did have a very quick look at his statement yesterday, and I had a look at what he had to say about one particular residence.
Okay, well, we should discuss that now. What residence was that?
You bear with me for a second.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay, it was the one at 573 Tyrone North Road, which I included in my figures 26A through 26.
Oh, yeah.
C, I think.
Yep. And his response was that access was requested but not granted, and he undertook a roadside inspection.
I understand that, yeah.
Okay. But you haven't reviewed or considered any of the other dwellings addressed in Mr. Burge's reply statement?
No, I didn't have time.
Yeah, okay. All right. So if I take you to, I just want to ask you about some of the images that presented between figures 23 and 29. I don't want to belabor the point, but would we be right to understand, there's probably a quick way and a long way of doing this, Dr. Williamson, so I'm going to try the quick way first. Would the inquiry be right to understand that those images were not taken in the, if you like, the enclosed garden areas of the dwellings, but some of them were taken on driveways or workspaces outside those locations? Is that broadly correct?
Yeah, generally within the area that I would consider the curtilage of the house or the homestead.
The curtilage of the house. Okay. So if we look at figure 23, for example, and it's probably easier if I share this. Okay, can you see figure 23?
Yes.
And 23B?
Yep.
And figure 23 is 728 Nadu Road looking east to southeast, and 23B is looking southeast to south. And I assume that they're a panorama. If, in other words, if you had a massive bit of paper, you could stitch that to there because that tree is that tree, yes?
Correct.
Yeah. Now I'm going to try switching around a bit here.
I'm just
Yep.
I'm just noticing that 23C should have been an extension of that panorama, and it looks to me like I may have inserted the wrong photo. It's the same photo as in 23B. So that panorama does swing further around to the right.
No, I've noticed that. So in other words, you're making the point that 23C is the same as 23B.
Yeah.
That's fine. I noticed that, but that's not a complaint. I'm just trying to pinpoint the location where you've taken some of these photographs. So I noticed from figure 23A, we have this brick fence here. Is that brick fence a fence that, like a garden fence, that encloses the garden for that dwelling? Do you recall?
That's the fence that just on the outside of the immediate yard of the house, but
Yeah.
the photo's taken from the driveway where they drive in and park their cars before they go into the house.
Okay, so that driveway heads to the southeast, doesn't it? Is that the main driveway?
Yeah, that'd be roughly southeast, I think.
Southeast, yeah. Yeah. And so the driveway is to your left and behind you where people park their vehicles in this house. Is that how that works?
Well, the driveway is right where I'm standing, where I took the photo.
Okay. Okay, got it. And so when I go to the LVIA, this is dwelling D45 in the LVIA, isn't it?
That's right.
So this is the driveway. You can see the garden fence in figure 12-30, which is the same one you saw in the corner. And if I keep scrolling, this shed is the same as this shed.
Yeah,
yes?
maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, it's quite hard to tell, but you can see your image, I assume, was probably taken from somewhere close to where this green dot is, where Mr. Burge would have taken his image, looking this direction around to this way, yes?
Pretty much, yes. It would have been maybe 2 or 3 meters difference in where I was located.
Yeah.
Possibly 4 or 5.
Yeah. So if I go to Google Maps, this is the same dwelling, isn't it?
Looks like it, yes.
Yeah. So you were standing about here, and the shed that was in your figure to the right of your figure 23B, that's likely to be this shed, isn't it? Because you're looking
like it,
down.
yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So and this is the driveway heading to your southeast or southeast, you said.
Yes.
Yes. So those images, I'm just trying to zoom out. So the wind farms, Willatook wind farms down here, isn't it?
Yes.
So figures 23A, figures 23 and 23B, they're not looking in the vicinity, in the direction of the Willatook wind farm, are they?
No, I think what I was demonstrating here was what other wind farms that would be viewed from this area.
Yeah, that's right. So you might, well, in that direction, you're going to have, for example, Willatook or Woolsthorpe, perhaps particularly, about 10 kilometres, 9 kilometres in this direction, yes?
I can't.
Nearest turbines, do you know?
I have to get my map to tell you whether you're right about the distance, but you're probably right about the direction.
Yeah, okay. And if we look at this image, Are we going to see any Willatook turbines in this image?
Bear with me for a second. I'll just bring up my Google.
Do you want me to get mine up? Would that help?
Well, you can if you want to.
There we go. So that's the shed. So it's kind of, you say it's looking south. I'm not sure it's looking due south, but that's okay.
No, we'll actually be looking a little bit southwest of it on the
Yeah.
right-hand side of the.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah. So yes, there would be some of the turbines in the eastern sector of Willatook would be visible in that view.
In that view.
Yeah.
So in other words, the person needs to have gone outside the garden, outside the house, outside the garden, into the driveway, and from this direction, they'll get a glimpse of Willatook around here, roughly.
Well,
that's your evidence.
Probably more than a glimpse. They'd be looking straight into it.
Yeah, okay. But it's not going to be over here, is it? And it's not going to be over here. You agree with me on that?
No, over there, that's looking towards Hawksdale and Woolthorpe.
Yeah, that's right. And so there may or may not be glimpses of those off in the distance through this tree and this vegetation screening here, yes?
Well, I'd say more than likely there will be views of those turbines.
Yeah.
They're, as I understand, fairly tall turbines as well.
Yeah.
So I think it's pretty likely.
Okay. But when you're inside this garden, seems like a lovely garden. When you're inside this garden, you're not going to see it at all, are you?
It's probably be fairly well screened from there, yes, inside the garden.
Yeah, okay. Now, I'm just going to move back and forth to documents, and I'll just stop sharing. And I assume this next image that I'm taking you, which is figure 24A, now this is the same property, but you're looking north to northwest. And again, you're looking away from Willatook, but I assume you've taken this image because you're looking towards MacArthur, yes?
That's right. Yeah, towards MacArthur, and I think there'd also be other views of Willatook.
Well, hang on, we'll get on to Willatook in a moment. But so north to northwest, that's
sorry, that particular view. Yes, you're right.
Yeah, you're not going to see Willatook. Willatook's to the south of this, right?
Yeah, so the panorama.
Yeah. So no, that's okay. So you can see some of the MacArthur turbines from here, and again, going to Google Maps, I'm assuming what you've done is taken an image. This shed is likely to be this shed.
Yes.
So does that make sense to you? So you're looking sort of somewhere around here, and you've taken an image north to northwest.
Yeah, that's right. There's actually a new structure there with the,
I think there is, isn't there? This is an old Google.
catty rods.
Yeah, I think you're right. But it's the next image I think you might have been referring to, 24B. This is looking northwest to southwest, I assume from the same location, because we've got some materials on the ground here, and I assume these are the same materials on the ground here. So you've probably wandered back up there and turned around and taken a shot to the northwest to the southwest, yes?
That's right.
And
well, I didn't wonder anyway. Just it's from exactly the same spot. It's just
okay, fair enough. And so northwest to the southwest is out here to out here roughly.
That's right.
And by that stage, I'm looking at the legend here. You've probably walked 100, at least 100 meters to take from the dwelling to take that image. Yes.
Well, I don't know if it's 100 meters up. Just a second, I'll tell you.
Yeah, no, go for it. I'll stop. So there's the legend, 50 meters. Can you see that? You don't have to be precise. Yeah. Ballpark it is fine.
Yeah, it's about 100 to 110 meters, perhaps.
Yeah, okay. And northwest to southwest, if I'm going to zoom out again, so we've got Willatook down here, and northwest to southwest is going to be roughly looking from this direction to this direction. So if I went back to your image, we might see some turbines on the left-hand side of 24B, yes? Or if actually I got that wrong, I haven't stitched them together. These are meant to be stitched, aren't they?
That's
that
well, yeah, they're a continuous panorama.
Yeah. Okay. All right. The next dwellings you discuss is depicted in figures 25A to 25C. Sorry, were you going to say something?
Did you want me to respond to that last question?
Yeah, actually, yeah, please do. Beg your pardon. Go ahead.
Okay. Let me just pick up where I'm at.
I'll zoom out so you've got them both on the one screen. That might be a bit easier.
Yes, Willatook would be towards the left-hand side of that 24C, I think it is, yeah.
Yeah. So you won't see it in 24B, but you'll see it on the left-hand side of 24C, yes?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Now, I next want to take you to 25A. And this is the property at 289 Nogorkus Road, looking east to southeast. Bear with me a moment while I get myself organised. And in the LVIA, one more. It's frozen on me. Let's give it a moment. It's D27. So is that right, or shall I go back to the photos and just we can try and orient ourselves around with the photographs in your statement?
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's the same property. Just a second. Let me just BB20.
What might help is let me stop sharing, and I'll try and find the images that will help you, perhaps.
Yeah, okay, I've got it here. Yeah, okay, go ahead. I think maybe you do have the right property. I just didn't recognize it at the time.
Yeah, no, that's okay. So the way I understand this is that you've got this driveway heading towards the road. So this driveway is almost due east, and then your panoramic shot goes from the east to the southeast. And again, I assume you just stitch. So that tree there is this tree here, and that's the panorama or the image looking from the east down to the southeast in 25A and 25B. Is that right? And if I go to Google Maps, I'll find it for you.
25B says southeast to southwest. 25A is east to southeast. And 25C.
Let's start with 25A.
Okay.
I might confuse myself and through that confuse you. So I'll pace myself. Figure 25A, 289 Nogorkus Road, looking east to southeast. Now it seems to me that driveway there and that tree there and these trees there, do you see those? This is the driveway heading east, and they're the trees in your image, 25A and 25B. Would I have that roughly right?
Now, the tree in the upper right-hand corner there would be probably the one in 25A.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for clarifying that. And then if we go down to image 25C, you seem to be more or less in the same location, but now you're looking southwest to west.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm assuming what you've done is you've turned around and you're looking back in this direction towards the dwelling, yes?
Yeah, they're just connected panoramas sweeping from east to west.
Yeah. And it's pretty apparent from this, isn't it, that this dwelling is enclosed with a garden and with trees and vegetation to the south and to the
Yeah.
west of the dwelling.
Yes.
And we've actually got images of that from the LVIA, figure 12-33, or figure, and there's figure 12-21, which is an image of the dwelling.
Now that's a different dwelling. In that photograph, I think that's the dwelling that's further to the west, the other side of those trees in the more open area, isn't it?
Dwelling D27. I think you're referring to dwelling D24.
Well, maybe I am. Sorry. Okay. Right.
And his turnaround is just looking south, that he being Mr. Burge, and that's the image. That's the image from within the garden of the dwelling at D27. Yes, that is this garden.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Now let's go back to your witness statement. And sorry, your figure 23C, that is the garden that we've just been looking at in the LVIA. Yes.
That's right.
Yeah. Now 573 Tyrone, I've got no questions on that. But VP 27 at 573 Tyrone North Road, if I understand this right, bear with me a moment, I'll stop sharing while I find it. Now 573 Tyrone North Road, that's just near the intersection of Reardon's Road, is it?
It's just north of Riordan's Road.
Yes, it's just north of it, isn't it? Just I'll share my screen to make sure I've got the right place, and if I haven't, you can correct me. So this is Tyrone North Road to orient you. This is Reardon's Road, and if I zoom out a little bit, we've got the Tyrone Terminal Station there. So is this 573 Tyrone North Road?
I believe that's correct. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm assuming the image that you've got on your witness statement, looking northeast. So you've taken that image because you're presumably there will be, you're interested in the views of turbines from that location, yes?
That's correct.
Yep. And that photograph has been taken from, well, let me just get the image back up again. We've got a shed there. We've got a shed there. And turning around, you've got a shed there. So
if I can help you out, it's taken from the veranda, the eastern veranda of the house.
The eastern veranda of the house. Okay. Yeah. So they are going to, from that dwelling, they're going to have, your evidence is they're going to have, that's a direct view from the veranda of their property, their dwelling.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And the next one is 2828 Woolsthorpe Road. This is figure 27A. Now, this is D9. This is one of the dwellings that Mr. Burge has given evidence of that was removed from the EES, the landowner's request. But I just want to quickly just orient ourselves around this image. Bear with me a moment. So I'll zoom out so we can see where we are. And we've got the Tyrone North Road here, and we've got the project and some turbines in this area and also in this area as well, to the east and west of Tyrone North Road, south of the Woolsthorpe Hayward Road, yes?
Yes.
And 2828 Woolsthorpe Road is this dwelling here.
That's right.
On the northern side of the Woolsthorpe Hayward Road.
Yeah.
And if I go to your figure 27A, it seems that you're standing on the northern side of the Woolsthorpe Hayward Road, and your camera, the center of the image is roughly, well, if we've got east to southeast, that image there. So 2828 Walsall Hayward Road is actually behind you when you took that image, yes?
Yeah, I'm standing right in the driveway at the entrance to the property.
Yes. And of course, we've got a clear view looking south to southwest from that location where you took the image outside 2828 Walsall Hayward Road, yes?
That's right.
Yeah. And if I go back to the Google Maps, it's also apparent, isn't it, that this dwelling and this garden is significantly screened with vegetation to the south, yes?
That's right. I mean, the reason I take photographs from driveways and entryways is that those are locations where these residences are coming in and out probably several times a day.
Sure. But it's in terms of the sensitivity of views, it's right, isn't it, through long-standing planning practice that a view from within a dwelling or the garden of a dwelling is more sensitive than the working parts of a farming property. That's the case, isn't it?
Well, that may be what planning practice has adopted or planning panels have adopted, but I don't agree with that.
I know that.
Think that we need to be give a little bit more scope to people who live in rural areas. They're not the same as people who live in an urban residential area.
Sure.
They're out and about every day. Their whole life has to do with working in and around the farm. And I think and this is where I was saying that I look at the curtilage, those areas which are immediate to the residential area and the immediate outbuildings and areas where they work, the immediate driveway area where they come and go on a daily basis. And as I said, several times a day, probably.
But Dr. Williamson, what do we do with that? So you're saying that when the occupant of this residence is in their home or enjoying their garden, they're really going to have either not see or have screened views of the Willatook wind farm. But when they drive out of there, I assume what you're saying, and the reason why you've taken this image is when they drive out of their driveway and onto the public road, they'll have views such as 27B or 27A, and they'll see turbines. Is that the point of you taking this photograph?
Yeah, that's right. And they're also along that road. That the road, in my opinion, would also be a level 1 or high sensitivity road as well. So this view represents the residence as well as the road from that particular point.
Sure.
So yeah, I don't know what you do with that other than I don't agree with trying to hem rural residents in so closely where the only thing you're concerned about is what they view within their internal garden space or views from living areas of their house, when they have a completely different lifestyle. They're living there and they're working in a completely different situation than what we would have in an urban situation. So,
yeah.
So anyway, it's just a difference of opinion. I just don't think that we should be hemming them in quite so much in that way, and we should be concerned with some of the views that they're going to experience frequently in and around their place of residence.
So, Dr. Williamson, let's be clear. Neither Wind Prospect nor Mr. Burge have proposed hemming anyone in to their property. You know that, don't you?
Right. Well, no, I don't know that, because it seems.
Well, we're not going to make anyone do anything against their will, are we?
Oh, well, no. I guess that would be the case. Yes.
Yes. So the recommended mitigation is to offer landscaping to people who want it, and it's the reality that, isn't it, that some people might say yes, and some people will say, I don't want to be, to use your expression, hemmed in by vegetation. That's the case, isn't it? Well,
that's right. But I mean, you're sort of going further down the track with the steps. The first step is to determine whether the wind farm and the particular turbines that are proposed with that wind farm will be allowed or not, or given a planning permit or not, or whether certain changes should be made to that. So I think you've got to look at that first of all in terms of the viewpoints, in terms of the visual impact assessment on a prima facie, and then you can look at what the mitigation options may be and whether or not the resident accepts those options.
I thought that was what we were proposing to do, but we'll take that on board. Can I ask you for your thoughts? Is the dwelling of 828 Woolsthorpe Road, Hayward Road there, would you describe that property as hemmed in by vegetation?
Well, not entirely, because on the north and the east side of that building, they've got views
Couple of
looking
meters.
back to MacArthur Wind Farm.
This one.
That one is much more hemmed in, yes. Well,
Yep.
hemmed in, visually screened by vegetation.
Yeah, thank you. So that's what we're talking about here, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, give me a moment. Okay, figures 28A and 28B are at 3234 Hamilton Port Ferry Road. And I'll start with 28A. That's looking northeast to southeast. So in other words, the Willatook wind farm will be off in this direction.
Yes.
And sorry, go ahead.
You probably start seeing it from where those tall trees are on the left-hand side.
Yep.
Probably start picking turbines up, about that vicinity, going all the way across. Okay.
And you've taken another image from the same garden. I assume that structure there is the same, that structure there. But again,
it's a few meters further to the south, within the yard, right at the end of the driveway.
Now, Mr. Burge has described this property as having a high impact on this property. Is that something that you would agree with? High visual impact?
Well, I think it probably would be, yes. They're relatively close there, and there'd be quite a few turbines seen. Okay. I'm not going to belabor the point and go through the rest of the images. I think I've made the point, but a lot of the images that you've taken, are not around the immediate environments of the dwelling or the garden, but they're outside those areas, such as the ones I've taken you to. That's right, isn't it? No, well, sorry, the one that we looked at on Tyrone North Lane, that was taken from the dwelling. True. The one that we just looked at was taken from the dwelling. And the next one that I've got in my series of photos in figure 29B is taken right from the front door of the dwelling. Well, let me get it up. Let me get it up. To be fair, yep. So where are we here? 3157 Hamilton Road. Okay. You mean, where are we on Google Maps, or? I'm just orienting myself. Give me a moment. That's what's coming up. Is that where this image was taken? Looks like it, yeah. Okay. And so 29B, is that the image you wanted to take me to? Yes. Okay. And that's looking northeast to southeast. That's there. 29B is northeast to southeast, and 29C is southeast to southwest. And okay, so fair enough. So you're saying at 29C, you can see that you were just near the dwelling there when you took those two images. Yes, I was right outside you know,
Yeah.
the front of the building.
Okay, all right. Now, I just finally want to ask you some questions about mitigation, and then we're done. Well, you're done with me. First of all, you make some observations around mitigation on page. Bear with me a minute. $16, I think. Yeah.
Page 16 of my page.
Of your witness statement. Yeah.
Okay.
Can I ask you, actually, can I ask you some statements of just some general principles? One way, perhaps the most effective way to reduce the effect of a wind farm on a landscape, or to reduce the effect of a wind farm on views, is to reduce the number of turbines. Yes?
That certainly would be one of the first things you could look at. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. You may not be aware, but when this project was originally referred to the Minister for Planning, and the Minister decided an ES was required for this project, it actually consisted of 83 turbines, not
Right.
59.
Yeah.
So now I appreciate you don't have the layout and can't do an assessment, but on first principles, the effect of a 59 turbine on the landscape and on views should be less than an 83 turbine wind farm, yes?
In terms
Just
of
on first principles.
general principles, yes.
Yeah, of course. Now, in the paragraph at the top of page 16, members of the inquiry, does it help me to get the page up, or do you have it handy?
Oh, I've got it handy, yeah.
I think
Maybe worth sharing just for the benefit of other parties.
I completely understand. Bear with me a moment. Okay. Okay, can everyone see that? Great. So at the top, you've proposed other mitigation alternatives to screening are not considered. The first one you mentioned was recolouring the wind turbines. This one surprised me because, well, what colour are you suggesting?
I have suggested in the past to various wind farm companies that they consider using more of a blue-gray type of color rather than white. And the reason for that is if you take the color spectrum, you've got white is completely at one end of the spectrum and black is completely at the other end of the spectrum. So in terms of contrast with background colors and so forth, white is one of the worst colors that you can use because it'll have the highest contrast with anything except for having white clouds behind those turbines. So
I've never seen a white wind turbine. Most of them are grey.
Well, they're an off-white
and matte.
Off-white
Matte grey. This is white.
Well, I wouldn't call them gray. They're not gray. They're maybe an off-white, but they're certainly not gray.
All right. So you would change the colour of the turbines using shorter towers or smaller diameter blades. Now, of course, in order to generate renewable energy, there need to be a sufficient number of turbines that generate a sufficient amount of power. So the likelihood is that if a wind farmer was to use shorter towers or smaller diameter blades, each turbine would generate less power, which means there'll be more turbines. Now, would that, in your view, necessarily result in an improved outcome from a landscape and visual impact perspective? Because it wouldn't necessarily follow.
Using shorter towers or having more turbines?
Both. Because in effect, if you have a smaller turbine, you're probably going to have a small power output for the turbine. So to compensate for that, you need more turbines. Yes.
Well, potentially, depending on what the situation is and what sort of a generator they're using.
Sure.
You know, we had a case, Bango wind farm, where partway through that project, they adopted a much higher megawatt generating turbine. And by doing that, they reduced the number of turbines from 70 some down to 49 or so. And they could have potentially had more turbines and, you know, done a compromise that way. But the fact was that with the larger generators, with 49 turbines, they were generating the maximum amount that they could put into the grid.
Yeah, but that's going to, the suitability of a turbine of a particular dimension or a particular size is going to be informed in part by the if you like, the resource, the wind resource, and what turbines are suitable to exploit that resource. You'd have to agree with that, surely.
Yeah, of course. I mean,
yeah.
In general, I mean, what you're saying, yes, if it causes more turbines, well, that's another factor you've got to look at in terms of what other impacts might be associated with that. But from any given viewpoint, if there's a problem, using shorter towers or smaller diameter blades would be one of the options you could look at.
Yeah. And finally, this is my last question. I've got on the preceding page. You've got a summary table of wind energy facilities in Victoria. We're not quite sure whether this is 100% correct, but it's quibbling, to be honest. But I just want to clarify one of these projects. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rows down. Do you see the Tyrone wind farm?
Yeah.
And it's a GPG project. Number of generators is unknown. And you say it's adjacent to Willatook wind farm. Is that adjacent on the eastern side of Willatook wind farm?
I think it's on the southeastern corner, if I recall, or it maybe just south of where the terminal is located.
So there's the terminal station here.
Yeah, so I think it's just
Tyrone North
south
Road.
of there.
Are you sure? I thought that was our project.
No, I think it's a bit further south than that. I mean,
I think it's down here.
Down to where Tyrone Lane occurs. I think it's in that vicinity there.
Are you sure?
Well, I'd have to go back and check my maps.
Do you mind explaining what the source of that map was?
The source of that map was
about Tyrone wind farm.
Was whatever the name of the wind farm company that was proposing it.
Okay, so you went onto the GPG website.
My understanding is that project is in abeyance at the moment, but could possibly could still be proposed.
Okay, so you're understanding that it's adjacent to the wind farm. You think it's south of Willatook. You're not quite sure, but it's on the GPG website. So should we go and have a look if we're interested?
I'm not sure whether the Moyne Shire included it in their submission, but it might be on that map.
Okay.
But if you go to the wind farm company's website, you'll find out where.
Okay, that's helpful. All right, thank you. I have no further questions.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Power. Dr. Williamson, we now have questions from Member O'Neill.
Thanks, Dr. Williamson. Just wanted to pick up the questions that Mr. Powell put to you about the 6 kilometre versus 8 kilometre visibility and the difference perhaps in view between the Delburn matter and this matter. And you explained in your answer that the difference was to do with topography in part, and that Willatook was a much flatter landscape. Would the height of the turbines be a relevant consideration in that, in the difference between the 6 to 8 kilometres as well, or is it more to do with topography?
Well, it's a combination of the two, of course, but in terms of likelihood of visibility, you're going to have less terrain screening in the Willatook region than you would in the Delburn region.
Mhm. And do you recall what the height of the turbines were at Delburn?
I think they were 250 as well.
Okay, thank you. In terms of your assessed, I guess, shortcomings and or limitations of the LVIA, do you see that arising because there's a lack of guidance or parameters in the Victorian planning system to undertake assessments? You talked about sort of a lack of guidance and you had a discussion with Mr. Power of the UK guidelines versus the New South Wales guidelines. Does that difference in point of view or difference between assessments arise because there is a lack of guidance in the Victorian planning system?
Well, I think it's a combination of the lack of guidance in the Victorian guidelines, as well as the assessor themselves in terms of what they're willing to accept, you know, what their sort of level of quality of assessment may be. And I think both of them tend to lead to assessments which I consider to be quite inadequate, particularly for an environmental effects statement, which should be quite rigorous and comprehensive.
In terms of the New South Wales guidelines, and you've talked about the shortfallings you see in the LVIA, do they pick up on or set parameters for things you reference such as sequential views or photography standards or number of montages or viewpoints?
Those guidelines don't talk about sequential views. They do talk about cumulative views in terms of the number of turbines and the degrees in the visible area that may be taken up with turbines viewed within 8 kilometers of the viewpoint. In terms of responding to your other questions there, can you just repeat some of the other things you're asking about?
Photography standards or number of photo montages or suggested viewpoints.
Photography standards, I think in New South Wales is handled through the Land and Environment Court, which have guidance on that. So yes, they have photography standards in relation to that.
Do they nominate a number of photo montage points? For instance, I think you're critical of the number chosen in the LVIA and suggested that there could have been more.
Well, I don't think they specify the number of photo montages. I think that all depends on each project as you go in terms of what may be useful to represent some of the critical views that would exist. So I don't think that they specify that in particular in terms of actual number of photo montages. They do talk in the guidelines about having, to a certain extent within urban areas, having representative views in urban areas where you may have multiple residences and other public locations. They talk about using representative views within the urban areas. Outside that, what they're looking at is a representation of views which represent some of the both representing the variety of landscape situations that you might be in, as well as picking up some of those key views where the impacts might be particularly of concern.
So are the New South Wales guidelines more prescriptive or informative in your view than the UK guidelines? Or, I mean, is there any reason why, and I mean, I accept the point that neither are referenced in the VPPs, so is there any reason to give one, a greater weight than the other, or that it would provide more, benefit in reference over and above the other?
Yeah, well, the New South Wales guidelines really, they set up an assessment procedure which is much more based on a visual management system, which is derived from the original US Forest Service visual management assessment or system methodology. It's much more based on that. It does look at issues of scenic quality and viewpoint and viewing distance zones, looking out from the viewpoints towards the wind turbines. And so it adopts that approach much more than the LVIA approach doesn't do that. Okay.
Does the New South Wales guidelines talk about using vegetation to provide screening or potential screening?
Oh yeah, sure. That's one of the potential mitigation methods.
So I think I understood your evidence that you were critical of the cumulative assessment of Willatook in conjunction with the other wind farms in the LVIA. I mean, I guess at the end of the day, does the LVIA provide sufficient guidance or an overview of what the actual impacts will be of the Willatook wind farm within its environs?
Sorry, you mean in relationship to the other wind farms in the surrounding area?
Yes.
Look, I don't think so, and that's one of the things I think there's a lot of inadequacy in the cumulative visual impact assessment, particularly in terms of the public views with the residential views, the dwellings. They've discussed in a verbal way or in the text. They've discussed potential cumulative impacts in the text. They haven't shown it so much with the photo montages, and that's where I think additional photo montages would have been helpful. And the one particular view that we looked at previously from the edge of Hawkesdale, where they didn't include a larger photo of the MacArthur wind farm in conjunction with the other view of the Willatook, I think that's the kind of shortcoming I'm talking about. So particularly in areas, there may be pockets, and I've included a map that shows an overlap in terms of just distance zones radiating out from the turbines of the various 7 proposed or existing wind farms in that area. Where you've got overlaps of those zones, particularly in those pockets, that's where both public viewpoints and viewpoints from dwellings are more likely to be impacted in a cumulative sort of way. And I don't believe that this environmental effect statement has addressed that to any extent. And to a certain extent, I don't believe that the Victorian guidelines put much emphasis on that either.
But I guess you haven't done that exercise either to generate photo montages of those.
No, I haven't. I wasn't engaged to do an actual visual impact assessment, a full assessment. What I was engaged to do was a peer review of the assessment that was done for the environmental effect statement.
Okay.
So I've added a little bit to what you would normally do that to just illustrate some of the points that I've made regarding that. And that I've included a map that shows the overlap of those wind turbines in terms of distances. And I'm just trying to find that. Yeah, that's my figure 34 on page 78 of my report. demonstrates that issue. So every place where you've got overlapping areas within 8 kilometers, say, I think those are areas that you need to look at more carefully.
Okay, and just the final question. Do you think that the wind farm will have a more significant visual impact than has been portrayed in the LVIA?
Yes, I do. Particularly, with the assessments that have been made there. There's no real evidence that's provided when you look at the visual impact assessment conclusions, the overall visual impact level that's assigned. There's no relationship between that and, say, the scale of effects in relation to distances. And there hasn't been enough information provided in terms of the linkages between all the various factors that they looked at, or if they looked at them, and what the last outcome was. And so, some things depend a lot on the actual individual viewpoint in terms of what's screened by terrain and vegetation and what's not. But in some cases, I think that it's completely underestimated that. And a couple of examples of that would be with dwelling D17. There, they said the visual impact assessment would be low, but if you look at the distance, it should be, just going by their scale of effects, it would be dominant. So whether that's just supposed to be the effect of vegetation or potential mitigation is hard to tell. But that's another thing I think you need to look at is in a number of cases where they're saying that the trees are going to be able to screen those turbines. I've had a very quick look at some of those things, not being able to take as much time as I would like, but looking at the height of the vegetation in relation to the viewpoint, and then also the height of the turbine in relation to the viewpoint. And there's a number of cases there where the indication in the impact assessment is that those turbines would be fully screened out or predominantly screened out, where in a lot of cases, the upper portions of those turbines are going to be quite plainly visible from those spots. So there's a number of places like that that need to be checked out. D17 was one that I noted. Dwelling 24 was another. Dwelling 25 was another one. And I haven't had time to go through and look at all the rest of them, but those are some of the cases. Now, in Mr. Hack's peer review, he also noted some discrepancies between the visual impact rating that was given in the LVIA and what it would have been if you were going by the scale of effects as a measuring stick. So I guess I'm not the only one who's questioned this to a certain extent.
So the comments you've made in relation to those dwellings, is that based on the difference of opinion or view Mr. Power put to you about the sensitivity of dwellings is more to do with the dwelling or the garden rather than the sort of broader landscape, the broader property curtilage? Is that where the difference of the
no, that's a different issue. That's to one side.
Okay.
What I'm talking about is from the actual viewpoint that was used for the LVIA.
Mm-hmm.
You look at that. You can do it in Google Earth. You can do an elevation from the viewpoint across to another point. So you can set your viewing line at the viewpoint, take it out to a particular turbine, and ask it to show you the elevation, and then you can estimate where the vegetation's at, what the height of the vegetation is, and you can draw a straight line from the viewpoint through the top of the vegetation and across to where the turbine would be to get an idea of what portion of that turbine might be visible. And so I'm just saying, I think that in some cases, and I haven't had time to do this, as I said, I wasn't engaged to do an actual assessment, but my quick look at it is that there could be problems in a few places in terms of what has been estimated in the LVIA. Normally, if I'm doing an environmental effect statement or a visual impact assessment, if we're talking about things like that, things are very case sensitive. So just to give generalizations about whether something's going to be visible or not is very difficult to do. So I always include a lot of cross sections with using view lines in my assessments. This report didn't include any cross sections that I can recall in that analysis. So just to give a sweeping statement that no, those turbines won't be visible is, I think, a little bit of a generalization.
Okay, so you're saying that they haven't, or in your view, that they haven't proven up the finding?
I'm saying a lot of the assessments they've made regarding the overall visual impact, they haven't actually provided the evidence to back up that particular conclusion.
Okay, that's all the panel's question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. There are further questions, Dr. Williamson. Just to wrap a few things up, and
okay.
Sorry.
I will be touching on questions of P2P planning. However, what I'm doing is I'll be referring Dr. Williamson to paragraph G on the bottom of page 16 and the top of page 17.
Regarding my report, which report?
Your report, yes. I'll share on the screen, Dr. Williamson, regarding vegetation screening. So if you go to I'll share it now, and I'll show you what that refers to. So I'll just scroll up to the top just to show where we are. We're talking about residential dwellings and reliance on vegetation screening.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll go down to G. Just a few things to follow up, Dr. Williamson, about this paragraph. You refer to many local residents, particularly farmers, and express their opinions in here. What's the source of this feedback?
Well, these are some of the people that I talked to when I was out doing this field trip, but it also reflects what I commonly hear when I'm working with farmers on wind farms in various places around Australia. I don't have this in an exact survey. I do believe when I did the Crookwell wind farm, we did do a bit of a survey, and that was one of the things that we found out.
And you say that they have enjoyed their outdoor lifestyle. Are you, and as a factor of quality of life, one of the benefits of rural life and occupations, are you just reiterating what they're saying, or are you advocating on their behalf?
No, I'm not advocating on their behalf. I'm saying that these are the kinds of things that they have said to me.
So you're just relaying the message across?
Yeah, it's just in a generic fashion.
Just in the final sentence, you say, unfortunately, planning law and planning scheme zoning provisions do not recognise such rural benefits as a right or as a significant enough to provide greater protection or compromise in planning decisions regarding wind farm developments. I'll let you read the sentences above, just see the context for that.
Yes, okay.
Yeah. Now, the first question before we ask you this last sentence, when you say when the focus is only what can be seen from the lounge room, they're being that they are being disrespected or treated in a manner similar to battery hens. Again, is that your opinion, or are you
No, that
what they said?
that has been expressed to me by other people, but I think to a certain extent, yes, I would agree that there's too much dependence on just mitigating the view from their immediate residence and not looking at the area much further than their front yard or their veranda. I think that, you know, from a planning sense, that we should provide a bit more consideration there.
In the final sentence, unfortunately, planning law, you've read that.
Mhm.
So you have sufficient understanding of the planning system to make that comment?
Well, I think as a general principle, I think in terms of planning law, normally it's regarded that nobody's got a right to a view. I think that's you know, in a generic expression of the law. I think that's what is usually considered to be the case. So I think when we're doing these sorts of, if we're talking about looking at visual effects, visual impacts, I think we need to look a little bit more widely than what seems to be accepted practice at the moment.
So Wilson, when you're sought for your advice to assess landscape and visual impact, do you do it in a sort of a blue sky space, like a policy vacuum, or do you go to the provisions of the day and policy of the day to understand, for instance, what is a sensitive environment or significant landscape?
Well, I do it from both. I mean, I think we certainly look at what the statutory regulations may be, but I also look at it from the standpoint of what the visual factors may be and what the actual visual impact might be as well. So I don't believe that say planning scheme regulations, for example, necessarily are comprehensive in terms of identifying key landscape features or landscape sensitivity.
And I don't mean to ask this disrespectfully, but you're not a qualified planner, so you're not. That's a view from an expert in visual impact, a landscape expert.
So you're asking me if
Yes, I'm asking you that view. I've seen your qualifications. You're also a qualified planner as well.
I'm a landscape planner, not a statutory town planner in the old sense of the word. So I'm more of a landscape planner. I do have to deal with planning regulations, obviously. So I'm familiar with those, but I can't say that I'm an expert from a statutory planning standpoint. No.
That's all to know with your level of familiarity. We have some other landscape experts who are less familiar, more familiar. So when you made your comment regarding the planning provisions, or I should say the zoning controls, did you understand that the plan scheme is subordinate legislation to the Planning Environment Act for assessing permits to do with wind farms proposals?
Subordinate information.
Legislation. It's subordinate legislation to the Planning Environment Act. It's law.
Well, I would assume so, yes. And that's why I think you need to look, draw a wider net than just what the planning scheme controls say.
So irrespective of all your views, they are the law. You understand that?
Pardon me, say again.
Saying irrespective of your views, whether you agree or not, they are the law of the day. The provisions for the IEP to assess the permits.
Oh, yeah, look, I understand that.
All right. I just wanted to clarify that before we hand you back to Mr. Fetter. And all the questions in the IEP. Mr. Fetter, any re-examination?
Yes, just a couple of things. Thank you, Chair. The first thing, Dr. Williamson, is you mentioned the New South Wales guidelines. Can I just put on the screen, this is the New South Wales government's website, the planning department under wind energy. I've noticed visual assessment bulletin, and I can click on the document and show you.
Yes.
Is that the guideline you were referring to?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, we'll make that available to the panel. Thank you. And the other question was picking up what the chair was just putting to you. I have in front of you now a provision of the Moyne Planning Scheme, Clause 65, which, if you are familiar with it, requires the responsible authority, who will be the minister in this case, to consider a number of matters, including the effect on the environment, human health, and amenity. Do you see that?
Mr. Fetter, would you mind just enlarging that a little bit for me, please? It's quite small without me putting my face right up to the camera.
No, that's okay. Can you see there's a reference there to amenity? And I think that there are other references in section 60 of the Planning Act and the objects of the Planning Act that again pick up ideas of amenity.
Yes.
And so can I just ask, because Mr. Power was asking you about the distinction between subjective and objective assessments. If we just deal with visual amenity, in your opinion, is that something that can be considered without having regard to how human beings appreciate landscape?
No, of course not.
Okay. And so I think, to be fair to you, Mr. Power at least was suggesting that in your report, and he took you to page 33, where you said it was relevant to take into account the reactions of, quote, different viewer groups to the turbines. Would you accept that you've strayed beyond a consideration of visual amenity there?
I don't know quite how. I think we're not, when you say visual amenity, are you talking about scenic quality, or are you talking about, you know, visual impacts as might be perceived by viewers? And if we're talking about viewers, we need to talk about what the level of sensitivity of those viewers are. So that means we need to categorize them somehow. So we're talking about viewer groups, viewer types. So from that standpoint, no, I don't think I've strayed beyond the realm of visual amenity in that regard at all.
And in considering how the turbines may affect different viewer groups and giving your answer, is what you're telling the panel an idiosyncratic view, or how does the rest of your profession approach these things?
Well, as I say, there are differences between the visual management system approach and the LVIA from the UK in how they approach those things. As from what I can see, the LVIA doesn't necessarily provide a categorization of level of viewer concern. I can't recall exactly how they go about it, if at all, but they completely confuse the whole issue of viewer sensitivity with landscape sensitivity. Whereas in the visual management system, they completely separate viewer sensitivity from the quality of the landscape, the scenic quality of the landscape, and the potential visual absorption capability of that landscape. So I just just trying to get back to your question as to what I need to respond to there. Can you just repeat the question again?
Well, again, I'm asking whether your view that it's legitimate to take into account how different groups would react is idiosyncratic or else in line with prevailing professional opinion.
Well, it's not. It's in line with providing professional opinion. If you say by idiosyncratic, you mean is it only me that's saying this? No. The visual management systems used by the U.S. Forest Service, it's used by the Bureau of Land Management throughout all the federal lands of the United States. It's used, it was a system adopted by the state government through the Forest Commission here in Victoria and applied throughout Victoria. It's adopted through the visual assessment procedure used by the Department of Planning in Western Australia. It's applied by the Forestry Commission and generally accepted in these sorts of assessments in Tasmania as well. And now also through those guidelines that we just talked about in New South Wales. So I'd say that it's a fairly widely used concept. And the LVIA like to refer to viewers as receptors as if they're some sort of robots, but they're actually people. And people have different sensitivities to things, and depending on what their motives and their location of view might be.
Okay, now in some of your answers, I think you said it would have been desirable if perception studies had been done. Is that right?
I think it's always desirable if they can be done, even if it's done in a very simple way.
Right, hang on, that's just a hook to the actual question. Just hang on. I just want to show you in Mr. Burge's report, I've got on screen, this is page 17, where in his discussion, I'll scroll up, of visual impact. You remember Mr. Power showed you this diagram, yes?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
And then under viewer numbers, he there seems to disaggregate, for instance, tourists as a separate group to consider. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then over the page, after setting out extracts from the UK guide, under scale of effects, if I keep scrolling down, he describes a positive visual impact as one that improves the view. And he goes on to say that these positive reactions are supported by findings in community perception surveys. Now, are you able to say, and you please tell us if you can't, do you know, is he referring to the same sort of surveys that you were referring to earlier?
Yes, I think he is in that particular spot in a general way. And, you know, there are studies, different perception studies showing different responses, and of course, different responses by different people as well. So that's a very general statement there, but I would agree with it in principle.
All right. Well, having seen that, do you understand there to be any difference between what you and Mr. Burge have done in terms of taking into account how different viewers might perceive the impacts of the turbines?
Well, he's used landscape character units and given of sensitivity rating to each of those landscape character units. He hasn't mapped where those character units are. He's only described them in terms of the viewpoints that he's used. And in some cases, he's been, in his assessment itself, he's been inconsistent in terms of that.
I just let me just bring into sharp focus the nub of my question. I think what Mr. Power was suggesting was that your assessment is subjective, and what Mr. Burge has done is objective. And now, having shown you these extracts of his approach to visual impact. I'm asking if you agree that there's a difference of approach, and if there is a difference, would you agree that yours is subjective and his is objective?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Uh,
All right.
No, I think mine is every bit as subjective as his is, and in fact more so, in that I actually, spell out the types of roads and viewpoints that should be considered of higher sensitivity or not. But that's a different issue from visual impact.
Maybe it's just an issue of terminology, because if you go up here, he says that the overall impact is the outcome of quantitative criteria that can be measured, balanced by a discussion of the qualitative aspects. And it may be that what Mr. Power is putting to you as subjective, objective is really a question of quantitative versus qualitative. Would you like to, well, having regard to that distinction, again, would you accept that you're doing something different to what Mr. Burge is doing, or do you say that you're approaching it the same way but reaching different conclusions?
Well, firstly, I haven't done an actual visual impact assessment. I've been providing a peer review or critique on the visual impact assessment that was done. If we look at what was said here, and what Mr. Power said, I actually think that the LVIA is much more subjective than the approach that I'm saying should have been taken. There's, in terms of quantitative information, the only quantitative information that's provided in the summation of the overall visual impact assessments that are done for each viewpoint through the LVIA report is the distance, a distance related to the scale of effects. But then that is somehow magically modified in the conclusion that is made and the overall visual impact assessment rating that it's given to each viewpoint through various things that are said to be considered but not shown to be considered. So, you just can't track it. You couldn't use this assessment procedure. Somebody else couldn't take the same method that he has used and apply it and end up with the same result. It would be, completely potluck as to what different people might come up with. Whereas if you used a more rigorous approach, you'd be tracking each factor as it goes along, how those factors are combined with each other, what the rules of combining those may be, and how the composite of those factors lead to identifying the landscape of being different levels of significance, different levels of importance, and then also what the relative visual impact, not of just the closest turbine, but all of the turbines that might be seen from that view, how that then comes to a final conclusion, what the overall visual impact should be. And that's where the whole thing is lost in the LVIA assessment, is that Mr. Burge doesn't really show how he got from A to B. There's a lot of stuff in between going on. It's all in his head, but he doesn't really express it in the report, demonstrate it, so that anybody else could track how it is. So you either have to accept what he says on face value or not accept it. But it's very hard to track that whole thing. It's almost magic. That's why I say it's like a black box. You don't know what's in there and how it all relates.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Williamson. That's all from me.
Okay.
Appreciate your time, Dr. Williamson. You may be excused.
Thank you.
Now we are